All right, I think we're good. Once again, thank you for your patience. I feel like I've done this so many times. You think I would be better at it, I feel like I'm kind of getting better. I don't know, maybe. Kind of more off the cuff, especially if when you see people who do it every day. That's actually really impressive. I don't know if I could do that. I would fuck it up so hardcore. I think it's good. Okay, hang on. Let me call them in. Just make sure they're good to go. And then hopefully Discord isn't going to fuck us up like they usually do. I'm drunk in the back of the car. Just waiting. Talk about red pill stuff again. It's been a while. Hello, Robbie. How are you? Hopefully my volume is good. I can always turn it up if need be. What's up, Ansel? Got a long night today. I gotta do this, then I gotta do another podcast, and then I gotta go to a birthday party. I need to shower at some point in between all this. I'm sure I'll figure it out. Yeah, I have to eat and shower. Well, I could eat no, I don't want to do that. Talk about purple pill? Yeah, I feel like I'm purple pilled. I think that's probably a good. I think purple pill is really, or maybe or I've heard white pilled. I like white pilled. But purple pill, I think, in general. Because I think there's a lot of red pill stuff that is correct, or that is true. Or that their red pill guys are very good at observing certain things, but their explanation of those things about life and dynamics is usually super off, and it's coded in so much bitterness towards women that it's ends up being useless. Okay, hang on, give me 2 seconds. All right, calling our guest just to make sure it's working. Hello. Would you mind speaking just to make sure your audio is good?
Okay.
Perfect. Okay, I think that's good. Awesome. What's up, man? How you doing?
Good, and you?
Good, thank you. Thank you for coming on. It's been a while since I've done one of these. I always like talking about red pill stuff, but usually just not in comments because it gets pretty hard to keep up with it all and stuff, especially on YouTube. It's not like Twitter where it lets you know there's new messages, so keeping up on it is kind of hard.
Yes, the chat gets overwhelming after a while.
Yeah. Do you want to introduce yourself? Go offer a name you'd like to go by, and then we can hop right in.
Yes. You can use my profile name. I don't remember what. I think I have Eliel Fenrir something like that.
What Fenrir, is that something? Because I feel like I've seen a bunch of people with that username on YouTube. Is that Fenrir something? Is that a character or something?
No, it's from the Norse mythology. It's
oh, okay.
I think it's one of Loki's sons. The one that eats the hand of, I think, Baldur, and at the end kills Odin at Ragnarok.
Spoiler? No, I'm kidding. I didn't play Ragnarok. I played the first God of War way back. Or sorry, the first new one. I played the original trilogy. I played the first
the
new one. Yeah, the 2018. Sorry, God of War 2018. But I didn't end up playing Ragnarok. I heard. I don't know. I heard good things, but
who has the time?
Yeah, or also just that, from what I heard from people, is that it was very cinematic, which I'm kind of, I don't know. I like those kind of games occasionally, but it seems like more and more I'm seeing a lot of those kind of very Last of Us.
Yeah, movie games.
Yeah, perfect movie games. Which sometimes I like. But when it's everything, I'm like, come on. Sometimes I just want a Call of Duty shooter.
Yes, I think it started back with, I don't know if it was Quantum Break or Heavy Rain. I think was the first kind of real movie game.
Oh my god, Heavy Rain!
You did a quick time events, and then you needed to.
I think that was the first. I think you're right. That was like the first like popular. I think Last of Us was kind of like the watershed moment. But I think you're right. Heavy Rain was really the first one. People were like, "Whoa, man! If only we had known then, it was going to destroy the industry." But
well, if you can argue, even Kojima did it back in Metal Gear Solid 1, I think. There were some long cutscenes.
Yeah, true.
In Metal Gear Solid 3, they're like hour-long cutscenes. So
yeah,
it was heading in that direction eventually, I think.
Yeah, but it was at least it was paired with like some pretty awesome gameplay. I can't wait for they're making the new they're remaking Metal Gear Solid 3, right?
Yeah. Yes. And that game has some deep, crazy mechanics. Just the fact that you're able to kill enemies by trapping the scorpions and just letting them free so they can poison, that was the next level thing back then. And I don't know what they're gonna do now, but
hopefully they don't dumb it down. If anything, I hope they make it better. But yes, so we are here today to talk about Red Pill Manosphere stuff. I have talked about it in the past, and I feel like I don't know what about necessarily kind of got me back into it. I think I saw some posts. Well, actually, rather, I think part of the reason I'm getting back into it is it seems like the Red Pill, and I don't know if you're more keen on the Red Pill or the Manosphere in general, but it seems like the Red Pill has sort of disintegrated to an extent, particularly with the sort of like, not, I don't want to say, maybe not the best way, but sort of like the downfall of Andrew Tate. A lot of, I know Destiny, the streamer Destiny, just did a big sort of like tour where he went on a lot of their podcasts and kind of embarrassed a lot of them. Sneeko was kind of big into it, and then he kind of got out of it. Even I think wait, sorry, what?
Yes, I know that about the downfall of Tate. I don't know if he was like a joining point for all of them. I think he was mostly the most media grabbing personality among them. He was the like flash in the pan, the avatar of the thing, let's say, but unelected, obviously.
Yeah, kind of like a lightning rod. He kind of brought a lot of, because like the Red Pill had been around for a while. He kind of stepped in, was on a lot of their podcasts, Fresh and Fit, all of those, and he brought a lot of attention to it. And then when
I wouldn't agree that Destiny humiliated anybody but himself recently.
Oh, I think he humiliated a lot of. I mean, depending. Well, I mean, like at least
his personal life got the better of him, and I don't think that's something that is going to recover easily from.
Well, funny enough,
you lied. I don't know what to say. Do you lie? You made your bet. Now you have to lie on it.
Funny enough, I actually think the Destiny situation, despite it's unfortunate for him, I actually think it disproves a lot of Red Pill. It's sort of funny. A lot of the Red Pill dudes were kind of shitting on him for it, but it was funny because when you actually like look into, from what I know about it, it actually kind of disproves a lot of Red Pill talking points. But we can touch upon that in a bit. But so, if you just want to start off, what is your big sort of, or what was it that I remember I mentioned, we were talking in a chat thread, what was it that sort of like, what was your big disagreement with me, or what did you take umbrage with in terms of my takes on it?
Yes, so going back to the beginning, I saw I think both videos are really important. The body type masculinity video on movie stars. I think was one, but the biggest is obviously the one that came out of left field. It was online dating, a big 1 hour video. That's a really good documentary, and I agree with most of the video. I think mostly the thing that I disagree with fundamentally is there is like I say, a practical element that it's been applied by some, let's say, coaches that claim to be Red Pill, but the difference stands that these people only want the practical, I want to sleep with anybody I please, or I want to get as much money as I please. And I think that's a very surface level critique. That's people who are, let's just say, essentially grifting on the ideas, but the main ideas behind them are proven, at least what I've seen, to be true, since it's basically a response to the last like 40 or 50 years. So it's kind of like, yeah, maybe some dumb guys are using this to catch some clout and maybe sell some courses and shit, but the underlying problem is still there, and there is basically no other tenable solution, at least that I've seen, entering in the public discourse, at least I think. So that's the main gripe that I have, is that there is a practical, or let's just say the utilitarian version of the red pill, and then there is the more like, hey, you have to understand the principles of the thing in order to be able to actually critique the thing, not the latest installment of it. It's like I said in the email, it's like critiquing Star Wars, basing it on the, I don't know, Mandalorian season 3 or something. You're getting out of context, so you don't know anything about it. So you have to go back to really be able to see what's valuable in it.
So, well, I mean, I could argue that like Star Wars, whether people like it or not, the new Star Wars is part of Star Wars, part of the legacy, and that's something we can touch upon in terms of, because one of the arguments I often hear about, when I'm talking about the red pill or the manosphere, is like I'll point to dudes like Tate or Fresh and Fit or like the whatever podcast, Rollo Tomasi, and a lot of people would be like, not them, like those, no, those, a lot of those guys are kind of clowns and cringe. But whether you like it or not, they are the face of the movement. I've said the same thing about feminism, where a lot of one thing that's sort of, for me, that's sort of like, or one of the big flaws that feminism ended up running into maybe like 10 years ago was that they were trying to make it a very like marketable movement. It was less about like politics and more about, they were trying to brand it as if like, Beyonce, feminism, stuff like that, make a lot of girls just say they're feminists. But the problem was is that as they were doing that, they ended up watering down what feminism was. And so a lot of people, because like, there's probably a bunch of girls who say like, I'm a feminist. And then like their extent of it is like Taylor Swift, woo. Like, they're not really like, they don't know anything about like patriarchy or, the literature, the radical feminism, nothing like that.
The main difference that I will try to let you say argue is that while the underlying premises of the feminist movement are less known, they're also inherently wrong. So while maybe some of the manosphere red pill people are not as good communicators, maybe they're more chauvinists or entertainers, meaning like Fresh and Fit, it's basically trash content. Well, let's just say it's more like just like for laugh or consuming. It's not deeply intellectual or anything. It's at least the underlying premise, or at least the backup knowledge or the citations of the books that the guy uses is solid. That's what I will argue. That even that the message is not, let's just say, politically transmissible as easily as feminism, since there's never going to be a red pill Taylor Swift. Never going to be that. It's not popular, but at least
you could say underlying Andrew Tate was the closest that we got.
Yeah, it's the closest, but he was like more like a meme. He was not like he was like, yes, he was important, but never to the level of mainstream institutional power that I think that, frankly, you can argue that maybe even Taylor Swift has, so control of the music industry and basically a lot of influence among people, like the average Overton window normie following. That's what I argue. Arguing Tate was for most people like a one thing that happened once that maybe you saw in the news, but nobody takes it like seriously.
He burned bright
and disappear, and then people started to notice, and then he started to say, "Well, I was a hustler, and I borrow money from the, I think it's the Romanian mafia, or I don't know where
whatever,
he's and then I run a cam business where I scam idiots like you for money, thinking that they're gonna get a girl when they're actually just being scammed by me." And that it was not the proper, let's just say, it wasn't a good protagonist to root for. He was basically just like a heel, like a wrestling heel that you may entertain looking at, but it was not like something that was going to last.
Yeah, so before we can touch upon like feminism and stuff and the underlying things like that, but so there are two things you mentioned that I wanted to ask you about, and that is, and they're kind of related. One, you mentioned that the red pill is a response to a problem that has arisen over the last, you said, about 40, 50 years. And then also you mentioned that you think the underlying principles of the red pill, even if they're, the guys who preach them can be like cringe or they're kind of all over the place, you think that they are solid. So what would you say is either or, what is that problem, and or what is the underlying principles that the red pill is trying to, that either preaching or trying to address?
For me, let's just go back to the original metaphor. Obviously, the red pill comes from the Matrix. Wachowskis did the movie, the scene with Morpheus. Red pill is just essentially you either accept the hard reality, or you take the blue pill and accept non-reality that is comfortable. So the underlying problem that, and this goes way beyond men and women and human relationships, is that we, for the last, I don't know, 100 years, maybe more, but just regarding intersexual dynamics, for the last 50 years, we have been living a lie, a complete lie, meaning that we detach, for example, sex from reproduction, and we thought that people could be independent when they never were. Human beings are obviously social, but we thought that women could work same as men when they first they can't, at least physically, and most of them don't like it, as shown by statistics. So you can see that there is a underlying problem that we haven't been honest with ourselves or with each other about what this is supposed to be. I mean, we have a lot of advantages: air conditioning, birth control, modern democracies, but these are all institutions that should help us to be better. But instead, they're covering it up. What I would say is fundamentally fallacies. Fundamental fallacies that are just starting to catch up with each generation. And for example, this is completely unrelated, but the fiat currency is something that our money is devaluing constantly, and
the
United States government.
Before let's stick to the red pill. So
just the red pill. For example, we can. It is a lie to say that sex and relationships are detached. For example.
Hang on. Yeah, so let's wrap it around. So you mentioned 3 things that we can kind of touch on. So the first is you mentioned intersexual dynamics. So what's like? Can you kind of hone in? Like, what is the lie that people are?
The lie was that basically blank slate theory, that the fact that women and men can or should be equal. That's one of the main things that it's really weird about the modern and postmodern world. Thinking that men and women can be equal, and that their sexual strategies are the same, or that their relationships are the same, or that they even function in a similar way. They're complementary, but never the same. I was once, I saw it in a video, they explained it like that. Men are 2 plus 2 and women are 3 plus 1, meaning they balance out as an equation, but they're not the same. Meaning that, and you can see that in their behaviors and how it is this has manifested until today. And we are seeing the extremes, and basically by letting people be just whatever they wanted to be, they became the worst or their more primal versions. They just wanted to have unlimited access to whatever they wanted, be it attention for women or sex for men. And eventually that's not going to work because there's not enough people around and there's not enough time. So that's going to leave us like we are now, basically isolated from each other.
Yeah, so the one you mentioned was equality between men and women. So, I mean, I don't think anyone would ever say that men and women are the same, obviously, because, I mean, like, we're using 2 different words to describe the groups. And not only that, but I don't think anyone would say that all men and all women are the same. Even, we have similarities, but, like, there's, like, a very wide range of between men and women. But when we're talking about equality, or men and women being equal, I don't really think most people are using that in the same sense of, like, we're saying they're the same, or like they're exactly the same, or like ignoring their differences, but rather they both have equal value in a society, in the sense that we're all human. We all deserve equal respect as human beings.
Yeah,
when we're talking about sort of like the feminist movement, primarily is it. Now, I actually kind of don't agree with this in regard to, the stereotype is sort of that women were sort of looked down upon, prior to the sexual revolution, in the sense that they were sort of viewed as a lesser, like a lesser class of human, similar to like, how you would say, black people or whatever. Now again, I don't necessarily know if I agree with that. However, particularly for women, there were a lot of restrictions. So obviously, like many women were shut out of the workforce, they were restricted to sort of just, homemaking roles, being, homemakers, being, traditional tradwives, which is in and of itself, I have no problem with. If a woman wants to do that, she just wants to be a stay-at-home mom and, pop out babies and, be a homemaker. That's all well and good. The issue is that many women were not really given a choice. And to sort of like, to add on to that, I actually think a lot of men were also, this is kind of where I kind of divert from the feminists. They'll sort of argue that like, well, patriarchy also includes men. I don't really know if that is usually the focus, though. I think a lot of men were also, a lot of people say it's like, well, before 1950, men were like living large. It's like, I actually don't think that's true. I think a lot of men were also suffering, and the sexual revolution, or just sort of the counterculture, was a response to this sort of society-wide bubble that was growing and growing and growing, and then it finally burst.
Yeah, it basically happened because, like I said, the myth is that before let's say just 1960 or before 1920, the right to vote, women didn't have any power, which is obviously a lie.
Well, they were. I mean, they were.
If you look at the historical record, you see that not only are they large parts of society with a lot of social influence, what they didn't have was specific political power, because back then the consideration was if you had the right to vote and you had it to. It's basically like the movie Starship Troopers, service guarantees citizenship. And that means that if you have the right to vote, you have the obligation to be drafted to a war. Mm-hmm. So if you were a person in 1917, or let's just say 1916, if you were a female, you will never seen the trenches of or Normandy or France or whatever. But if you were a male, there was a large portion of that generation who went to die in Europe, and they were obligated by it. So it wasn't like a responsibility that didn't have the trade-off. And it isn't obvious to me that the acquiring of political power was either on the benefit or really something that was popular. Because if you look at the records, actually, you see that the suffragettes weren't that popular. Many women didn't want to be political in the sense that they wanted the right to vote, because many thought that that would lead them to become as responsible as men, meaning that they could potentially be drafted, or they couldn't perform the role that they wanted to, that was being housewives. And I will argue that literally, if you go back to the root, it's really weird. It's like a parallel. Top percent men wanted to do something, and they got in an agreement with the top percent women to screw all the other ones out of, let's just say, a fruitful life. Because the lower class men were dead meat, they were soldiers that could be used for wars, and lower class women could be used as a service, while upper class women could become part of the government and vote and do whatever they wanted, and upper class men could obviously do the same. So it's not obvious to me that this was a gender dynamic, mostly that it was a race dynamic.
But why would upper class men want to? Because the 19th Amendment was passed, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, so why would those upper class men want that? Wouldn't they want to like squash that?
No, because it serves them. Obviously.
How? How does women getting voting power serve upper class men? Wouldn't that potentially threaten the men's sort of like stranglehold over the country?
No, because they now have a larger voting block automatically, and they don't need to placate this voting block. Let's just say that that new voting block doesn't have the power to overthrow them. It just created and double, just like labor force. Labor force double, so you have now twice the workers. Said workers now have less money because their salaries just got cut in half, and now the guy who had the ownership, or the politicians, or the big owners of tech or corporations, could more easily divide and manipulate people. So that's what's a genius move. If before you needed to pay one guy a lot of money to perform one job, now you need to pay two guys less money to perform the same job. So it was a genius move, at least from a political sort of machination, Machiavellian thing. Let's put women to work and let's give them political power. Let's just say.
Well, hang on, that was
we'll keep hanging.
Just to stop you, because that was later, right? That was in we're talking about the 50s and 60s.
Obviously, that's what they said, but the
yeah,
plan
but we're talking about the
even in the 1920s. You have to understand that by this point, liberalism was like 100 years old or 200 years old. So the intellectual elites already read about Locke and Rousseau, and they have all these ideas implanted about the equality of man, and they just wanted to implement that. And just like if you can go back and read some of the suffragettes, you realize that there is a little bit of a weird division within them, that it was just mostly for upper class American white women that wanted to do this. Not many middle class, not many black, not many immigrant women wanted to be part of this project. It was mostly just a kind of like a lead woman thing.
But is that because, but to be clear, is that because they were content with their role in society, or because they didn't want to have the threat of the draft hanging over their heads? Because I don't really think that's so the issue with that is that when people sort of bring this up, they're talking about well, a lot of women didn't want it, and it's well, why? It's well, because they were scared of the draft. It's well, yeah, I mean, I probably would too. The issue with a lot, or actually, here's a better question to you. How many men in, say, so around the time World War II broke out, men were given the right to vote, but that also qualified them to be drafted to be sent to the front lines? How many men do you think would opt out of their voting rights if it meant they didn't have to go to the front lines?
Back then, given that the makeup of the army, I think it was 38% volunteers and 68% drafted, given that America was basically booming and it had a patriotic spirit, I think most men wouldn't have opted out of the power.
What makes you make that assertion?
I would say that America was having basically the war started to congeal the American spirit. So I think that most men would still prefer to have the right to vote and serve in the army than to not have the vote and not serve in the army. And I will argue that from economic productivity, from testosterone levels, from the opportunities that were granted, I think it was a better, let's just say, a better bet to go to war and come back to a productive government or a productive world than just to not go to war but let the Germans basically dominate Europe. So I think that was a major calculus.
But that's for the United States government decision to enter the war. I'm talking about the general layman. You have a general guy. He's got a wife and kids. He's told, hey, you're drafted. You have to go to the front lines. Probably die in a foxhole, die in the trenches. Get trench foot. Get eaten by rats. If that gentleman were given the option to say, hey, or you can sacrifice your voting right and you don't have to do that. You can stay at home and not be sent to those trenches.
Back then, the morality and the personality of most men wouldn't have allowed them to just stay back home. I mean, history has always been about cowards, but psychologically, I think men too are more prepared for war. And if you form that and you say there is a great enemy across the sea that you had to fight, most men are going to do that, and you put some economics incentives in there and protecting your wife, protecting your children, and you do some marketing and some fear mongering, and you basically got an army set up. Men are not that it's not that difficult to convince men to go to war. It's that's something that history has proven very easily, and I think the mathematics checks out. If you go to a war and you win it, it means that maybe obviously some men die and then don't get to see the children, but the children live and their society lives. So it's better to go to war and die than to not go to war and let the Germans come here and just the same kill you and take your wife and your kids. So
but again, we're talking about, again, I think you're kind of getting, like, you're talking about like the U.S. as a nation's justification for entering the war. I'm talking about like the average layman. But to your point about, like, you know, talking about cowards, do you think men who protested the Vietnam War or who were like draft dodgers, do you think those men were cowards?
To some extent, yes, to be honest. Even though after the war, you could see that it was a futile effort to try to uproot the Viet Cong. Even in and of itself, though, it's basically a patriotic duty. And that means that even if the war after is not, it was realized that it was a waste of time or everything, you're still pledging allegiance to your country by serving, even if you don't agree with the war itself. So it's basically something that it's cowardice to just try to become apolitical during a war, because it is your society. So,
but those men weren't apolitical. They were saying, like, to your point, it's a patriotic duty. In those men's mind, this is an unjust war. My own countrymen are being sent across the world to a nation we have no idea anything about. We don't even really, most people didn't even today, if you ask people, they probably even know what the fuck Vietnam was about. So in their eyes, I mean, couldn't you make the same justification for defending any sort of decision made by your superiors, your president, whoever, even if you think that decision could lead to harm for your nation, right? Like, there's when it comes to patriotic duty, I would say that there's even an element of sometimes your true patriotic duty is telling the superiors no, pushing back against the establishment in order to do what is morally correct, either for your fellow countrymen, for your country as a whole, etc.
That gets more into like the virtue of the morality of those making the decision. So obviously, if you go to war and you're asked to kill women and children, a virtuous person would say, no, I'm not going to do that because that's neither logical, that's just a barbaric. So it depends on the act itself. But if you think about it from more of a macro point, it's mostly about survival. So if men have this innate survival mechanism that you either, because you have to understand most people throughout most history, most men only encounter two enemies, either an animal that they had to kill, and the animal was irrational, so you could kill it without remorse. But the other most common enemy of man was other man, so they had to, and that's a mechanism that most have inbuilt. It's not about the morality of the decision, it's whether the survival action should be taken. And most men, if they're going to be killed, or if they're rather kill or be killed, most are just going to kill and ask questions later.
Yeah, but in the case of the World War I, we're talking about men who, I mean, like, they were like, it wasn't as if like people were like invading the United States. These were like, they were being sent like thousands of miles away. So if that's true to your point, if men have this survival instinct, wouldn't that sort of contradict your point about men being, like, again, if they were given the option of saying like, hey, do you want to go to this like country where you're fighting a war where maybe you don't even know what the hell, I mean, again, this was like the 1920s. This is before like mass media. This is before, you know, television. The actual like, you know, details of what was even going on over there was very murky. So doesn't that sort of contradict your position of, if these men were given an opt-out, it's like, hey, you could give up your voting rights to not have to be drafted. Why wouldn't that survival instinct kick in And those men were like, yeah, no, I'm not doing that.
Because most of them didn't thought in the now current, let's just say, day atomistic view of personhood. I mean, most of them saw themselves as sons, as patriots, brothers, cousins, more communitarian societies. So if they are bound by the community, by the political community, to defend them, and it's basically an existential threat for the political community. If you don't do that, then your survival means our survival, and that means that if enough men are cowards, that means that our society just crumbles. And
but if
even if the details are not clear, individual men are just prone to protecting. That's one of the major instincts, and that's one of the things that I want to differentiate. Women have a protective instinct, but mostly for their children, not for the political community, and they don't have that predisposition for violence against enemy combatants. So obviously, if you treat women like men, they're obviously going to be afraid of the draft. They don't want to go to war. Most women don't have either the disposition.
To your point, I don't think most men want to go to war. That's sort of my point. Is this sort of, when we're talking about, like, when people bring, but that's sort of like
most men don't want to go to war, but they have to. That's the difference. Men have to.
Well, they didn't have to in Vietnam, and they pushed back against that, and it probably saved the counterculture. Probably saved a lot of lives, because Nixon at that point was sort of gung ho about, even in 1968, when even like Walter Cronkite was like, hey, this is bullshit. Like, Walter Cronkite was like the most trusted man in America, and he was like, this is bullshit. We need to get out. People are, we have no idea why we're over there. Our countrymen are dying for no reason. We need to get out. And then Nixon, dragged the war on for another 5 years.
Obviously the Vietnam War was at the end just a show for the Cold War. But even though that happened, that doesn't diminish the fact that by incentivizing the avoidance of the draft, it set up a bomb of social disintegration, that it would just start to roll on from there. And it's curious that you mentioned the 1960s or the 70s, because that's what I say is a trigger decade, when both the invention, the contraceptive pill, the economic downturn of the US, and the loss of the Vietnam War, you get this ball rolling of social disintegration that you could see reflected on men and women of today. I mean, you can see that in their faces that and the studies bear this, that people are more politically divided today than ever. They're more socially divided, they're more isolated, more depressed, more anxious. So I don't think that was a good thing.
But to all of that, to what you just said, I would argue that is primarily, if not overwhelmingly, like greatly overwhelmingly, due primarily to the advancements in technology. Not necessarily the birth control pill, but just social media, the internet, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That, I think, is exacerbated. I mean, it's made everything a lot better in a lot of different ways. But those problems that you specifically mentioned, I would lay that at the feet far more of the developments of technology, social media, the internet, et cetera, et cetera. To your point,
what is technology if not an appliance of the ideals? I mean, chemistry is really useful, but you can both make oxygen for pulmonary patients, or you can use mustard gas to kill a lot of people. So you have to be aware that there is some principles behind the technology. So if the technology is designed to do something, or maybe some people get a hold of the technology, they're able to do a lot with it. A lot of good if you want to save people, but a lot of damage if you don't. So, for example, you have Instagram. Instagram was designed to be like your grandmother's photo album. Originally, the design was just take pictures, take memories, save them in the internet where they cannot be deleted. But some people got a hold of this technology and realized that human beings are very visually captivated creatures, so that you could manipulate them and use their eyes to make them purchase things by spending time on your platform. And more specifically for the men and women thing, is to bring it back to the red pill stuff, is that it gave women the appearance that they could just post pictures of themselves for strangers to admire. That's a really weird thing if you think about it. You're taking pictures so that anonymous stranger, uh, people that you don't know where they're from, you could be on the other side of the world, to put a heart icon on your photo, on your story, and to get this virtual admiration. Then I think that's something that's not good for your psychology. And I think most of Hollywood shows that people being celebrities is not good for the mental health. And I think Instagram made a celebrity out of basically normal people, and that wasn't good.
But you could argue that's like we're connecting people all over the world. That's a fantastic thing. But so just to go back, just to touch back on it, so you mentioned the 60s, particularly the invention of the contraceptive pill, birth control.
Yeah, that's one of the major things that I argue that thing is not as discussed as it should, because the fact that we invented a technology that allow people to decouple sex from reproduction is one of the, let's just say, one of the major catalysts of what we're seeing today. Meaning, before, people knew that sex led to reproduction, meaning that they have to have some care about it. They either had to be married or they have to be socially agree that they were going to enter into this. But if it's just plain obvious from the statistics that after the birth control pill, both the abortion rate and the divorce rate skyrocketed, because people are not as smart as they think. They're not as moral as they think.
So hang on, even though wait, Raphael, no, but hang on. Just before we, you're kind of, no, hang on. You're just getting a little bit like you're, soapbox. Hang on, real quick. So to that point, I feel like we're putting it all on. This is sort of like the issue I have when people talk about this period, when we're talking about like the 1960s. When we're talking about the 1960s, that area, we weren't just talking about the contraceptive pill. We were also talking about the sexual liberation movement. We were talking about the civil rights movement. We were talking about people's, particularly in the 70s during the Vietnam War, people's trust in the government was just, disintegrating completely.
Took a nosedive after that, and Nixon was the great catalyzer for that.
Yeah, so the issue I have is that when people talk about the 60s, or like this period, particularly red pill dudes or Mansford dudes, they usually talk about it as if it was like this. It was like, I don't know if you've seen Avatar, but like, like the intro where it's like everything was fine until the Fire Nation attacked. You
mean Nickelodeon Avatar, not James Cameron?
Yeah, the Nickelodeon. People make it seem as if it's like everything was going great, everything was fine, and then like a meteor like crashed onto Earth, and then it cracked open, and then like feminism popped out, and then it ruined everything. Whereas the way I view the 60s, and I think this is, if we're talking about human nature or just any era ever of human civilization, the 60s and everything that came about afterwards was a response to something. It was a response to an underlying discontent, whether it was among women, I think also men as well. There's a lot of, literature. I think today, particularly with like the Mansford Red Pill, there's a lot of like romanticization of like the 1950s, like the post-war era. And like to some extent for good reason, because our economy was booming. We had just won the war. We were like living large, like the nuclear family. Let's fucking go.
Yeah. People look back on those days with rose-tinted glasses because they at least had something. Now they have nothing.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. I don't think people really had anything. That's the whole reason that we like to think that was the case. A lot of people then thought that was the case, but then that bubble, it was like a bubble growing larger and larger and larger until it burst. It seems like, because like again, when people talk about like the 1960s, they almost make it seem like all of a sudden the fucking feminists came out of the woodwork, and all of a sudden the black people want right. It's like, well, no, it's like this was all like, again, it's like a bubble that was like growing and growing and finally burst.
It was bubbling up for a while. I wouldn't make any negative comments on the civil rights movement, because
but isn't that also correlated with the divorce rates, people's unhappiness, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? Isn't that all correlated around the same thing? Why are you putting it solely on the contraceptive pill?
Well, at least for the red pill stuff, it's not really concerned about immigration or racial dynamics of the U.S. because I think that's a separate issue. Well, it's not really that separate, but it's not connected the way people think. The main thing that leaps people back to the 70s and the 60s is that retroactively people have uncovered that it wasn't that good of a foundational decade, meaning if let's just say the silent generation left a good base for the next one, the greatest, and then the greatest left the greatest left to the silent, and then the silent lent to the Gen Xers, then and you have the baby boomers, and then you go on and so forth. The 60s, since they were so busy responding to their grandparents and parents, they never worry about constructing anything. And that's the major point that I think people on the red pill or other spaces point out, that it was what the first moment that people stopped building and just started destroying. And the problem is, if you're going to just destroy, at the end, a couple of generations later, you're gonna end up with nothing.
Well, hang on, just
and
real
you
quick.
Got to see that you got to see the destruction of the nuclear family, for example.
Well, hang on, just because we're kind of getting like soapboxy again. When you're talking about like destroying, what was it that generation was destroying? Like, to your point, I mean, like I would completely argue with that over the last 50 years. If we look at developments in technology, just quality of life across the world, things have been going fantastic. So what specifically? What specifically are we talking about? Are we talking about that was destroyed in that time?
Obviously, the principles, the underlying ideas of Western civilization, the U.S., the modern democracies.
Like, what are those?
Basically, the idea that men and women are different. That was one of the things that was by the invention of the contraceptive pill. People thought about women as economic units, as workers with the same capacity to work as men, since now they couldn't get pregnant like the men, obviously.
Yeah.
So that was a thing that happened, but it was a destruction of the underlying conception that men and women are different and they should do different jobs. For example, that was one of the things that people thought that they wanted something when they actually didn't. And the other thing was the destruction of the nuclear family. The thing that people don't really harp on about is the divorce rate. The skyrocketing divorce rate, the skyrocketing abortion rate. People thought that they could decouple their
hang on,
own situation from reality.
Just a couple things. Well, one, the skyrocketing abortion rate was probably because abortion, like, you know, the technology developed. It wasn't like something happened. Like, it obviously it was because the technology was available. As for the divorce rate, that would primarily, is that the contraceptive pill or was that the eradication of no-fault divorce?
Both, actually.
Okay.
So you can see that both the technology and the principle of the technology both work together to destroy what was, until that point, a dysfunctional but mostly functional institution that was marriage. So by some exceptions, we, like they say, we threw the baby out with the bathwater because some marriages weren't good. We basically destroyed the idea of marriage.
But we didn't, though, because that's what the sixth, like, so this is like where we run into this is kind of like what my point was about, like, you know, the Fire Nation attack. We kind of look back on that. It's like, yeah, man, everyone was happy with, like, before the contraceptive pill came around, before the eradication of no-fault divorce, before women were in the workforce, everything was great. But aren't we ignoring the women who preach for, like, it seems like we're ignoring the fact that, like, again, you could argue the same thing about, like, things were great before the civil rights movement, and then it's like it makes it seem like we're talking about here's a better way to put it. Do you think the vast majority of women, if you pulled it in the 50s and 60s, would have been against what was going on with, like, the feminist movement in terms of the contraceptive pill, with no-fault divorce, with women entering, or rather having the ability to enter the workforce?
To be honest, back then, I think most women would have said no, just based on the just their own economic solution to be provided by. I think most of them wouldn't. But even if I think that
because
most
for
of them
women,
are not rational, that mean even if they use a rationality, you just have to take this forward a little bit on time. If you would have gone back to the 50s and told people back then what was going to happen in 40 years, if they did what they did, most of them would have said no. I think most of them were just
the issue there Christian. The issue is that you're drawing a line. If you went 40 years into the future and said, hey, because of the contraceptive pill, 40 years later, everything's going to go to shit, like, okay, maybe people would say, okay, maybe we shouldn't do that. But that is drawing a line from the contraceptive pill to our current state today, which I just don't, it doesn't really seem to bear out. Again, going back to like what I was talking about with the 60s, is that like a lot of shit went down in the 60s. A lot of stuff was changing, a lot of it in response to stuff that was sort of bubbling underneath the surface throughout the, previous, in the post-war period that is usually looked upon with rose-colored glasses, as you said. It seems like where the big issue I have with the red pill is that, as much as they tout themselves on being objective and like wanting facts and, being all factual and like objective and whatnot, they are it's very clear they have an agenda in the sense when they're looking back, they're picking very specific things that to blame that sort of fit there. So, for example, to your point, you kind of connected the contraceptive pill to the divorce rate skyrocketed after. Well, one, I don't think
the abortion rate as well.
Well, yeah, but again, like the abortion rate went up because the abortion became more readily accessible. But if we're talking specifically about the divorce rate, that was more as a result of the eradication of no-fault divorce, right? Okay, or actually, here's a good way to
obviously, but
this is just here's like just one question: do you think the eradication of no-fault divorce was a good thing?
No.
Okay, so here's the issue that I have with that. If you have a system,
I would like to argue the case for
I'll just say this and then you can go. The issue I have is that it seems like what you're saying is that, or what the implication is that, a lot of women were super unhappy in their marriages prior to the introduction of no-fault divorce. And the only because, like, again, if there were plenty of women who, like, so for example, I'm sure there are plenty of women today where if you said, hey, if you divorce your husband, I'll give you the government will give you $50,000. Well, I'm sure a lot of women would be like, well, no, I don't want to do that because I love my husband. The issue that I have, the way you're framing it, is it's as if like all these women were super happy in their marriages and then no-fault divorce came and then all of a sudden they were like, yeah, actually, fuck my husband. Well, no, that seems to speak to an issue of a lot of women felt either, I don't want to say like, no, I could say like shackled or trapped to some extent, in that they weren't like they weren't as happy as they could be. They weren't very happy. They weren't satisfied with these marriages. And once they received an opportunity to get out of that, they were like, yeah, I'll take it. So that seems to be it almost sounds like the way it's making it sound as if like you're framing as if prior to that everything was great. But what it sounds like, what it makes it seem like, is what was happening was that like the society was being held on by like duct tape. It was like, everything was like just basically being held up. And then once you rip that duct tape away, then everything came crashing down. That's like a good way to put it is like saying, the economy was fine in 2007 until the crash of 2008. That doesn't really make sense. Like the economy wasn't good. It was standing on toothpicks. That's how it seems. That was the whole issue with the post-war era, was that it was, everyone thinks, oh, everything was going great. Well, no, clearly it wasn't, because it was a bubble that was bursting that fell into,
it was on thin ice, just like World War One. Took Ferdinand, if he wouldn't been assassinated, somebody else would have done something and the war would have started anyway. But going back to the point, I think that the thing that you have to understand is that these things, the contraceptive pill, It's not just the technology, it's the idea behind the technology. The fact that you can control your own reproductive cycle. And basically, how the technology works is that it tricks your body into thinking that you are pregnant without being pregnant. And that's really weird. And it obviously would affect your mind, it obviously would affect your hormones, it obviously would affect the choices that you make. If you do the cycles throughout hormones in history, you can see that people don't act the same. Even men, when they're younger, you have high testosterone, and they don't act the same as they do when they're older and they have lower testosterone. Just like women, when they have estrogen, they want to have babies, and when they're after they have the period, they don't want to have intimacy because they're not able to produce babies. So you have to think about these things in a combined way, meaning that it's not just the pill, it's the idea that you can decouple sex from reproduction, and since you decouple sex from reproduction, people having less children, and since people are having less children, people are not worry about staying together for the long haul because they're just wanting to have one or two children, and then when those children go up, they realize, hey, we're old, and why do I have to take care of you? And that we don't have any more children on the way, so we can just divorce and do whatever. The husband can go and marry a second wife, and then she can do the same, and it's basically it's one of the root causes that facilitated the idea. But back to the point is that the principle was there. The idea of thinking that women and men were the same, that we would be happy by being more free, it's turned out to be not true. Basically, those restrictions made people, and that's the problem. People think that marriages were to be happy, and that's not true. Marriage was never about being happy or being mostly in love. I think that's something that comes from romanticism for literature for 100 years ago or some 200 years ago. What you read in English class, Romeo and Juliet shit and that. But that's not true. Most people got married because they wanted to survive. So before we have a functioning society, in that people might not have been happy, they got to their works, they had their kids, and they lived the best life that they could under the circumstances. Now we don't have anything. Now we don't have anything. Now men don't have kids. Women are getting to their 40s alone. That's going to be really, really scary within 20 to 30 years when they're more. Have you seen Japan? Japan has the same problem. No birth rate.
But the issue there is like, again, you're drawing it. Like basically what it sounds like you're saying is like everything that's wrong now with relationships ties back to the contraceptive pill, because if that were eradicated, women and men would still be shackled in this like this idea. Particularly women will be shackled in this idea of like, well, you need a man to survive. You can't, because again, it's not just the contraceptive pill in your mind. It's also the fact of women entering the workforce, right? It wasn't just that, because if a woman didn't want to, it wasn't just that women had to be that they had to separate sex with reproduction, because women, if they didn't want kids, they could just not have sex. But particularly it was because women were pressured into they like part of, for women it was, I have to get married because I don't really have any other recourse. There were some women who worked, of course, but on average most women were pushed into like, hey, you need to find a husband because you're not going to be able to take care of yourself. So for me, that I don't.
And men were pressured to find a wife and to produce children. That was a deal. But and that was a functional deal, at least.
Well, no, hang on. But no, it's
that was.
But as we just established, no, it wasn't, because then the 60s blew it all up.
Yeah, basically, the 60s blew it up, but it doesn't mean that before that it wasn't functioning. Obviously,
no, it's just. But that's. But again, you could say like. Again, you could say the U.S. housing market was functioning from 2000 to 2007, right?
Obviously, you could say that.
Maybe a better way to put it is like it was functioning, but it wasn't stable.
Well, obviously, it was functioning, but it wasn't stable. But it was more functional than what we have now.
But again, you seem to be like lumping in a lot of things with the contraceptive pill, or just that one thing. Like, so for example, to your point,
not just a contraceptive pill. I will argue Simone de Beauvoir's The Second Sex was also it was, you got the technological and the ideological. The ideological was first than the technological.
But no, I mean, I'm saying even
it is.
just put aside all the feminism stuff. I'm talking about just if I look at like society as of now, when I'm looking at the main issues, particularly when it's tied to relationships, when it's tied to starting a family, et cetera,
Yeah.
for it's almost entirely, I would put it on as like economic woes. Is this sense of like most? I mean, like what was it? Most Americans don't even have enough money for a $400 emergency.
Yeah, and that's bad, and that you can send that to Nixon for his decoupling of the gold standard from currency. You see how it comes back together? Is decoupling something that is real to become something that is not real, and then people end up suffering because we are lying, basically.
Yeah, but that is not. But if that's the primary issue, that has nothing to do with women. If anything, I like the fact that women and men could then do whatever they wanted following the '60s was a good thing, whether they wanted to have kids or didn't want to have kids, et cetera, et cetera. And also, to this point, it's not as if like we're kind of jumping from the '60s to today. People were still starting families and having kids throughout the '70s and the '80s and the '90s and I mean, even today,
obviously,
people are still doing it. Yeah.
People weren't going to see the effects of that for until now, probably. That was not going to throughout the culture doesn't work that way. They have to adapt and they have to integrate the technologies in order to make them work. For example, you have the U.S. Constitution that was written in 1806, I think, or 18 American history, but that was ahead of its time. So
what I'm saying is that like
it set things. It's really amazing that people back then could write a constitution that is still, even with amendments, working today. Most countries are not able to do that.
Yes,
but people thought about the future.
Yeah, but so again, just to bring things back, so the issue I'm having is like we keep trying to. I feel like the big issue again with any of this red pill. Again, they tout themselves up as like intellectuals, or that they're very, objective in facts. It seems like you guys are taking the last 60, 70 years of history and trying to like pinpoint like a single point where it all went wrong. And that's sort of what is frustrating. And I think that is where a lot of these red pill dudes and their ideologies completely falter. They're trying to, instead of looking at the whole picture and the complexities of everything that's transpired over the last 70 or 80 years, they're just looking at like, this is where everything went wrong with the contraceptive pill. Because it backs up their ideology.
Obviously, but you have to understand that you have to pinpoint somewhere. Obviously, you can write a 1,000-word essay on the different economic and political and social, and you could say maybe the contraceptive pill, and then it was Madonna, and then it was the Playboy.
But you're pinpointing you're pinpointing this area specifically for the woes of people of today. That's the I don't dispute that these were like major cultural shifts, but not all cultural shifts are inherently bad. Some are great. In my view, the contraceptive pill was fantastic. The ridding of no fault divorce was fantastic. Women entering the workforce was fantastic. These were all very good things. These were all these were and to your point of things like, oh, well, the divorce rate shot up. It's like, yeah, but that was clearly as a result of the unstable foundation that was 10 or 20 years prior. If all these women are divorcing their husbands, clearly they probably weren't happy in those marriages. But to your point, maybe to your point,
I would say that
maybe to your point, happy, it's not.
But the problem is that marriage was never to be happy. That was never the idea.
Do you think what do you think in general? What should society strive for? Do you think it should be to maximize the happiness and freedom and of all of the citizens, or what do you think? Like, what do you think a society like today in the U.S.? What should our goal be as a society?
It depends on the society, but the goal of every society basically is to defeat death, and to defeat death means to survive. And if you want to survive, you want to do things that either keep your enemies away or help you replicate. And the problem is we're not. The U.S. is not doing none.
So this is more about the reduction in birth rates.
Well, obviously the reduction in birth rates, but obviously you're gonna compile this with technology and the fact that the country is in a massive debt. Like I don't think people realize how much trillions are in debt, and that is basically, we have decoupled money from production, so we are just just a speculation. Everything is speculation, and the problem with speculation is that at one point you have to find out if the Schrodinger cat is actually alive or dead. The problem is we're finding out that the cat is actually dead.
We kind of agree that it's mostly due to financial woes, right? It's even to your point about like people starting a family, one of the big reasons.
What did that happen?
Wait, what?
Why the economy went to shit?
Well, exactly, but that's when
you go back to the 60s, decoupling gold from currency. What was the cost for that? Maybe because the upcoming generation was going to have double labor force. So you couldn't pay them with the same coin and the gold because there was not enough gold around. So that's but you can see it also as a way to basically pay people today and borrow money for tomorrow. That the housing market, the stock market, the production economy was borrowing money today to satisfy the needs of today.
But we would have been doing that regardless of whether or not women had entered the workforce.
I don't know if people would, but
certainly to
answer the question, basically, Jen, the goal was just an example. Is to society to do better is for the individual to do better. If individuals have to be truthful to do better, then society has to be truthful in order to do better.
And for individuals, to do better, I would say that maximizing people's freedom of choice is the number one.
No, that's not true.
Okay.
Actually, there is a psychological phenomenon called choice paradox, and that's one of the things we're living. We're living in a choice paradox society. I mean, we have so many choices that at the end we either don't make a choice, which is bad, or we make the worst choice because we have so many options that the human mind cannot comprehend which ones are valuable. So we ended up with a paralysis that just leaves society hanging. That's what has happened. Even in marketing, we only have like 3 options of something because people are not able to decipher 47 different types of products or services just to, for example, buy ketchup.
But we're not talking about like stuff. If we're not talking about like what kind of ketchup you buy, we're talking about like the way people are able to pursue their lives. So, for example, if a woman doesn't want to have children, do you think it would be better off? So let's take a 30-year-old woman. She's like, I don't actually think I want kids. That isn't really something that I want to do. I just not want to do that. Do you think that she would be happier, society would be better if there were structures in place to try to guide her, maybe even force her, pressure her into following a certain life path, particularly having children, getting married and having children?
For what I've heard and for all that I've read about the issue, yes. Actually, people are more happy when they take on roles of responsibility. If I heard women correctly, having children is fantastic. They love their babies. And I don't think that people who haven't had any babies can actually understand how deep that connection is. I mean, I don't have my own children, but I have nephews. So, people who don't have children don't understand how wonderful children are. So you cannot even make that decision.
Yeah, but you can say that about you can say that about anything for people not doing a certain choice. The sort of the fallacy that you just presented is this idea that like if a woman says like, "Hey, I don't want to have children," and they're like, "Well, you do. You just have to have the child, and then you'll feel." Like, I'm sure there are plenty of people who, maybe a woman, there was an unexpected pregnancy when she was like, 20. She went through with it. She had the baby and she was glad she did. But there's probably also many people in the world who did that. They had kids and they regret it.
Yeah, you could argue both positions,
Yeah.
but to my point, that your original nature's design is that you have children and you take care of them. That means that the most effective strategy is to have children, not to not have children. And that means that it's the most likely outcome to bring you happiness. Because
But do you think a woman, if a
happiness is an
woman,
elusive thing. I think if you cannot choose to be happy, you just stumble into happiness by doing the correct thing. And if most women correct thing is to have children, I think even if you rationalize all of it, probably better to have children than to not have children.
and I think a lot of people today probably still
I,
want to
I
have,
think
they may want to have children. They may want to,
but
settle
they're not
down
able.
and have a family, but they aren't able to financially.
That
But
that's a
even,
major problem. We took the meaning. Let's just say this example of 100% of the population of women. Let's just say 10% of women are incapable of having children. They are either infertile, they are not attracted to men for some reason. So you have 90% of women. So 90% of women do want to have a family and children. But now you have taken away that 90% choice because of the 10% that didn't want to have children. And for men, it's the same. Most men want to have children and want to have families
wait,
and wives.
hang on.
And
I
and
disagree with this. Wait, what are we, when you said like 90% of women want to have, where are we getting that?
that well, it's an statistic, but you
Yeah,
can
hang on. Well,
we
but let's
can
not,
go. It's not from a study, but it's just a
yeah,
hypothetical, an example. But
hang on, let's not do that because it's going to get us in the weeds. So the point
well,
I am
it's
making,
about it, but the principle is the same. The principle is that most women want to have children, most men want to have children. So the most logical conclusion is that by having children, most people are going to be fulfilled. If they're going to be happy,
well, no,
happiness is a really feeble thing that many people can describe in different things, but they're going to be fulfilled at least. So
well,
that's one of the things.
maybe they'll hate their kids and
But,
regret their decision
the
every
problem
day.
is the problem is you're arguing the exception. I'm
Well, no, I
arguing
don't.
the
But no, so this
standard.
is,
I'm
but
arguing the standard, meaning most people, if they have children, they're gonna be better. They're gonna have more responsibility. They're gonna have meaning in their lives. They're gonna leave a legacy. They're gonna have somebody to take care of them when they're old. They're gonna live a
and
productive society. They're gonna transmit their values. They're gonna do a bunch of things that people without children can.
and for those
And
people
the,
who,
and the statistics shows that people by themselves don't do good, neither men or women. People
and for
without children,
those,
without families, without friends,
and for
they're.
those people who want to have children, I am all for it. I think they should have that freedom of choice. But we're talking about the people who don't want to go that path.
But the problem is that you cannot base a society on exceptions.
But we're not talking about exceptions. We're talking about people just not wanting to pursue that life
But
path.
people
You
people
can
don't
people can
people
have a
don't want
kid.
to choose.
I mean,
People
a
don't want to
woman
choose that.
woman can have most women can have a child at any point they want, right?
Well,
Yeah.
yes and no.
No, they can go to a. They can go to
no,
a.
no, no,
They
no,
can
no.
go to a.
That's not that. That's not
No,
the
it is. They can go
technical.
to a sperm bank. They can go to a bar and just get
Yeah,
knocked
yeah,
up
yeah.
by
They
a dude,
can
and
they
they
can
can
make
have a child.
they can mechanically have a child.
Yeah.
They can do the biological process of pregnancy, but the problem is, again, we go back to the point. We're treating that thing like it's just a biological process, like it's mechanical. Most women wanna get married, have a long-term partner that cares about them, husband, a father to that children, and have those children in a safe environment that they can raise them in. So it's not just the fact that they can get impregnated whenever they want, it's that they want to have a husband and they want to have a family and they want to have a support network and healthcare and housing and all these things that come with children. It's not just about having the baby itself. So people
Yeah.
want, obviously men just don't want to just have children for the
So
sake
I
of
think,
having them. They
yeah.
obviously want to be a husband, a father, a brother. That's come to it's a holistic thing. It's not a separated thing. So I think that's the problem that we people separated the idea of motherhood from being there for the children, for providing emotional support. I mean, it's so bizarre that
so let's say
we today we send children to strangers to raise them, and then people are
hang on,
suddenly
Raphael.
Surprised
Hang on, Raphael.
when their children are not
Raphael, you're
connected by them.
You're getting too soapbox again. Sorry, because we're gonna get lost. So the issue here is that it's when we're talking about like personal choice. The issue, it seems like there are many women and many men today who are saying, even if that is something that like I would be open to if I met the right person, it's not something that I want. I don't want to, I don't like. Ideally, a woman might say, yeah, if I met the right person, met someone I really loved, and I want to have kids with them and settle down, like that's good in theory. But to your point, when you're talking about your view of marriage, isn't about ideal being happy. It's just about like you're almost framing it as like a duty that we as men and women have to do it. So if a woman is say 30 and she doesn't have, and she hasn't met any like dudes that she really likes, and she isn't able to afford a house, and she says, well, if I'm not able to do that, if I'm not able to find the right guy, and I'm not able to, afford a place to live where our kids can grow, then I'm just going to opt out of children. Do you think that woman should still, even if she has to settle down with a guy she doesn't love and live in an apartment aside from a house and like kind of like live below the poverty line, or live paycheck to paycheck, do you think that woman should, regardless of what she wants, do you think that she should still follow that life path?
Well, that's an unfavorable scenario, but
yeah, but wait, hang on, why?
Even if the circumstances are against you, even if that, the alternative is worse. Even if you go not from the virtue, because I will argue that there is a virtue and a duty to have children, raise them properly, and contribute to the society that help raise you, but even if we're not arguing from virtue, we can argue for utility, even just from a mere utility. If you don't have children, nobody's going to take care of you. So even if you would just want to see it like that, if you want to be at the mercy of a nurse at 80 years old in a nursing home, well, that's a decision that you can make. But I don't think that most people are realizing that that's the decision they're making. The problem is people don't think that they're going to get old.
But this kind of falls apart, because if you have kids and you're a bad parent and your kids hate you, they still won't take care of you when you get old.
Yeah, but that's a risk. That's a gamble. Yeah, your kid might die. It might be sick. Yeah, it could be a burden. But that, like I said, we do not argue for exceptions. We argue for the most functional, proven strategy that we have. That's what goes back to the civilization thing. We survive, we conquer death by surviving, by being effective, by following reality. And the reality is that most children are going to help their parents when they're old. They have the emotional attachment. They have probably, if you have more than one children, most of them can contribute. And that's what people did back then. They had multiple children. So even if one of them died or one of them wasn't good with you, maybe some of them were. So eventually somebody would take care of you. And you can see that. That's
isn't that
really
sort of
sad, that the rise of the nursing home in the US, that people don't take care of their parents or their grandparents because they don't have a connection. People got divorced, got separated.
Well, it's not
and
just
people are.
But hang on,
people got incentivized to not follow their
hang on
again duty as a son or
Raphael,
daughter.
I think you're kind of soapboxing. One of the other big reasons that the life expectancy has increased over the last 100 years pretty dramatically, and there are many issues that if your father has
antibiotics.
If your father has dementia, or if he has a lot of medical issues, sometimes, and especially that doesn't even, if you have parents and you have children of your own, you can't just split your time between taking care of your parents and working and taking care of your kids, right?
Obviously.
Yeah, so it's like you kind of made it seem like, well, old people are in nursing homes because their kids aren't taking care of them, but it's like, well, no, that's not true.
Because they can't, because the economy has left them without time. That's the most valuable resource that there is, time.
Yeah, but basically. But why does that matter? Because if we're talking about why is there time matter? Because it's all about just utility, right? Just the way it makes.
Time is utility. So if you have time, you have like the capacity to be economically productive or socially productive. My main argument about the red pill and why they're right is because they argue, even if they're not good at communicating that, men are economically or politically, let's just say, productive from the world of the door of your house outside. Meaning they're good at doing that. They're good at production. They're good at the no. Well, not at to the degree that men are. I mean, the most dangerous jobs, the most vital jobs, all performed by men. Even today, even if we argue that this is a white collar economy, even men now are most programmers. So if we're in the digital age, even men now are still important. But women are also important in the social sense, meaning that they are socially productive. They raise children. They instill values. They make communities good.
But you just said but to your point, most women are working. There are a lot of single mothers. The father's not in the house.
Yeah,
right.
And that's a bad thing. That's not good. That's one of the things that you can clinically prove with psychology, that children raised without a father do significantly worse in school, in incarceration, in education, economically, poverty, anxiety, depression, dementia. So that wasn't good, and that's one of the things I'm arguing.
Is that children growing up? Is that children growing up without a father or growing up in a single parent household?
It's the same thing, basically.
No, it is.
It's not the same thing categorically, but 95% of single parent household are women-led single parent household.
Yeah.
So if you can take maybe it's not enough sample size of single dads.
Yeah, exactly. So we can't really say if it's a matter of fatherlessness or if it's children growing up in single-family homes, right?
Hey, let's just say if 95% of single-parent households are led by women, you can clearly show a correlation that fatherlessness is the main issue.
No,
because it's mostly a sample. Not because even if the example is not 100%.
One sec, just because we're going all over. No. So the correlation we can show is that children growing up in a single-parent household is the correlation, not necessarily not having a father.
Oh, but what is a single-parent household that growing up without a father?
It's growing up with a single parent. That's what a single-parent household means.
Yeah.
So this is a perfect example.
That is mostly women-led household.
But you're pointing out, this is a perfect example of like the flaw in red pill thinking. You take a statistic, which is like, hey, children who grow up in single family households tend to do worse for almost every metric across the board. And then what red pill dudes will do is look, it's like, well, almost all of those, 90% of them are led by women, so that's the problem. It's like, well, no, the issue isn't the fact that there's no fathers. Again, there's almost like no data to even back this up. This idea of like, and it's almost like a really.
You can find the data. It is.
No, I can find data that it is. I can find data that there's a correlation between bad outcomes in single-family households, but I cannot find any data that says particularly that the lack of fathers.
You cannot find. Wait a minute. You cannot find data about not having a father being a bad effect for a child. I think I can Google that and find that right now.
Yeah, go for it.
I think it's mainstream psychology that not having a father is not good, and the problem is that, like I said, it's a distinction without a difference. Single parents household mean mostly women-led household. If you go,
hang on. This is where we're getting. Here's a better question.
You can argue with me the percentage, but you can obviously think for the U.S. Census, you can see it, that most single parents households are just women without a man. It is women-led household. It's not widow fathers who are raising single children.
Okay, hang on.
That's not the case.
But that's the point I'm making. The issue this is a perfect example of like red pill goon brain. when we look at the statistics, we see, hey, children who grow up in single-family households tend to not do as well across the board. And there are countless reasons for that, primarily attached to income. If you have a single income, you have lower household income, you're probably living in a shittier area, worse schools, worse nutrition, etc., etc., etc. It seems like, and this is a perfect example of like the red pill brain rot, where are we getting this idea that it's fatherlessness in particular, as opposed, or here's a better way to put it, for all the children who are growing up today in single family households, if their mother all of a sudden, I don't know, there was a genie came down and a magic wand and made all those women men, they were fathers now, do you think those kids would do you think the problem would be solved?
Oh, we will have a different problem in our hands. I just put a link.
What would the different problem be?
The problem would be motherlessness.
And what would the effects be of that?
Different.
Like
That's
what?
An issue. They would be different. Obviously, I'm not a psychologist, but
what would
but for example, just take the normal parents' gender roles. Mothers are nurturing, and they are good at keeping the children alive and well, while fathers, are good at instructing the children and helping them settle into adulthood. Obviously, the consequences of fatherlessness is that these young women or young men don't have a role model, so they become criminals. They don't do at school. They don't do good. Women go into certain professions that are not good for them, etc., etc. Obviously, if you don't have a mother, probably, I'm not sure, but the emotional regulation wouldn't be good. You probably wouldn't be as good as forming relationships. You wouldn't be as emotional or nurturing, since that's something that you obviously have to be take care of. And you can argue even more than that. Obviously, nutrition, if they didn't get mother's milk, you can say that will affect their health long term. But obviously, there are the psychological effects, and even you can see the child psychologist Piaget.
So what would be what would the world look like if instead of growing up in 9% of these kids growing up in single mother households, they grew up in single father households? What would be different?
This is a hypothetical, but I think that the hypothetical would be a world with more hierarchical, more restrictive, more, let's just say, more authority figures, probably more of a, let's just say, hierarchical military structure like society. That's probably what.
Do you think the crime rates among these children raised in single family homes will be the same or lower or higher? Or?
Probably lower.
And what are we basing that on?
The evidence that fatherlessness now causes more crime, not less crime.
But we're talking about.
Even in the hypothetical, if fathers provide stability, rules, authority, instructions, those children are going to be less likely to commit crime because they have an authority figure in the house and they learn how to be obedient to the authority figure that is outside the house. And that's something that you can see from the.
But the father isn't in the house, right? Because he's out working because he's a single father, so he probably has a babysitter, right?
Yeah. But he's still there. And that's the thing. Parents, fathers, don't have to be always present. Mothers do. Fathers don't. Fathers can interact less with the children.
Hang on, we're getting into like your own personal psychology philosophy. The issue, and this is a perfect example. It's not
personal. You can research Freud and Jung and Piaget, and you can find that this is really mainstream psychology. This is not something that is out of the fringes, and that's the thing that
to your point about mothers always having to be present, like it's, and even if
that's true. That's true. If the mother is not present, the baby dies. That's true.
Well, no.
So
there's plenty
obviously
of people There's plenty of people who were raised.
We have technology to keep babies alive without a mother. But
well, no, but
for most time, if
for single mother households, the mother goes to work, she gets a babysitter, the baby doesn't die, right?
Right now, yes, but
yeah, we're talking. Well, hang on, we're talking about now. Yeah, we're talking about now.
Even if we're talking about now, the children gets the psychological side effects of not being raised by their parent like they should.
Wouldn't that be the case? Same thing with mother. If it was a single father household, wouldn't all the kid have the exact same problems? Because they're not being raised by their parent.
They would have different problems, not the same problems, but they would have problems. I agree. The most effective, going back to the reality thing, is that the most effective, the most truthful relationship for a child to have on development is to have a mother and a father, both present and both being married. That's the most optimal for the children to have better psychological and social outcomes. And
how does that track to household income?
Household income. Well, it obviously if you have more income, you're probably going to be better economically. And if you are better economically, you are more likely to have both the resources and the time to interact with your children and to give them the tools that they need to do better. That's what that's most of human history. That's men and women coming together to raise children so they can do better than what they had. And that's been a continuum. The problem was that people stopped thinking about their children. They started to thinking about themselves.
Well, hang on,
that's the problem. Your argument. You're the one argument.
Raphael, we're going back to we're talking about single parent households real quick. So the issue I'm having is we keep talking about this idea that it's like, well, it's fatherlessness. It's the fathers. No, it seems like across the board, it primarily has to do with income. Most children grown
no. It's not the income.
Almost entirely, yes.
No, money cannot replace a father. That's the main argument that I would like to tell you that it's false. The U.S. government or let's just say the economic programs that
you're talking about again. You're doing this sort of like
single motherhood.
You're doing this very like philosophy. I'm talking about like the facts that we have.
But the facts that we have is that fatherlessness is not good for children. That's a fact. We can agree on that.
It's children growing up in single family households.
I just put a link in the chat. You can look at it. Consequences of fatherlessness is a really research topic.
And I'm looking at that. But the children who don't have their fathers, these are all growing up in single family households, correct?
Well, what is a single family household without a father? That just a single mother household.
Yeah,
by necessity it has to be.
But it would be the same if the mother died during childbirth and the father had to raise the child. That child would still be growing up in a single family household too.
That's what I would like to dispel. This is just that a mother dying while giving birth to a child is a tragedy. Nobody plans for that. Nobody wants that. Nobody incentivizes that. But divorce and single parent household are to some degree incentivized by society, even though they're proven to be not good. People choose to do this. People don't choose to be. Basically, men don't do that. They don't separate children from their mothers. We know that that's not good, but we pretend that separating children from their father is the same as separating them from a friend or something, and that's just false. That's not true. It's not true.
Hang on. What do you? I'm confused what we're talking about right now. Are we talking about single family households in terms of the like what?
Just to go back to the baseline, single parent households are bad for children.
I agree.
Most single parent households are made of just women-led households.
Yes, and what I'm arguing,
that's a statistical fact.
And what I'm arguing is that the issue seems to be single parent households, the idea that these children would be miraculously better if all the single mothers were single fathers, doesn't seem to be panned out by any data whatsoever.
Obviously,
we keep making a correlation between,
but we don't. That the correlation is that if single parents households are bad for children, most of them are composed by women. That would mean that most of the household led by women are bad by definition.
But you think
obviously that would include obviously father-led households, but that way.
Yeah, but that's the point I'm making, is that
but that the problem is that the weight would be carried by the 95%, not the 5%.
But the point I'm making is that the issue is a child growing up in a single family household. A single parent household, primarily due to the fact that is almost entirely correlated with low income across the board.
Yes, but
that seems to be, if we look at health outcomes, if we look at performance in school, if we look at behavioral issues across the board, it seems that income is the biggest indicator of this, and that seems to correlate. Well, because obviously, if you're living in a single family household, you only have one parent, that's one source of income. That family still has to work, so they probably have to take a portion of their income to pay for childcare. In most of single parent households, the parents probably weren't married when it happened, so they probably wasn't planning. They're probably already lower income in the first place. It seems like, because this, again, we're going back to this, it seems like the main issue here across the board seems to be tied to income, whereas with the sort of like the red pill view seems to be like, no, it's lack of fathers.
It's lack of fathers.
But
it is lack of fathers.
What evidence do you have for that, though?
Evidence that I have, obviously, you can track it from the historical record. The birth rate, the depression rate, the productivity rate.
But I'm talking specifically. I'm talking specifically now. What is the evidence that it is specifically the lack of fathers in the household that is the issue, as opposed to children just growing up in single parent households, regardless of the gender of the parent?
Evidence that you can find, you can check the link, is that you can tangibly check these results. You can track them. You can track the fact that somebody was raised only by their father. You can trace the fact somebody was raised only by their mother. And the fact that the mothers, or the vast majority of single parents households, indicates that this model is not functional, it's not good at producing well-meaning or well-established adults and children. You can see that by the depression rate,
but do you have rate. So here's a question that can sell us the bed. Do you have evidence that proves that children who grow up solely in single father households outperform children who grow up in solely single mother households?
I don't have the study right now.
Okay, then I do. Then that we can't do anything with this. That's the issue.
I don't have the study at hand, but I have seen that study floating around, and it's actually pretty close. Meaning that if the most optimal solution for a child is to have two-parent household, it is 100%, let's just say. And then having a father-led household, it's probably an 85%, meaning they're still doing good. While having a mother-led household is around a 50, a coin toss.
Well, hang on.
And that's the information that I got from the study, but I don't have the study right now. But it has been performed. It is a study that you can find about the specific composition of parents and the arrangement that you can find, and it has been studied with married, divorced parents, just father, main mother, and you can just it's something that has been researched, has the research up on it. But obviously this was meant to be an off-the-cuff talk, so I don't have that specific study. But just from what I can tell you, and from the evidence that we have, that you I don't think you can deny, is that children are not doing good, and most of the households are composed and led by women, and that solution is not good because it doesn't lead to a good outcome for the children. So it doesn't matter. It matters, but it doesn't matter to our discussion that a hypothetical father-led home would be just as bad as a mother-led home. The argument still stands that women mother-only homes are not good for children. That's just a principal argument, even if this study is
single mother-led homes and single father-led homes are not ideal situations for children. That's the point.
They're not ideal situations. But the point that I'm trying to make is that one of them is an accident, meaning one of them is statistically rare. Father-led homes are very, very.
Yeah, exactly.
You would agree they're rare, so they're not statistically significant enough to do most of the psychological studies on. But even if they were, that wouldn't negate the argument that I'm making that women-led homes are not good for the children, because we can see it from the evidence, and from the psychological literature. You can maybe check Peterson if you want, that having a mother and a father is one of the things that you can do for a child to make them better.
Is it having a mother and a father, or is it having a dual income household?
It's not the income. It's not the income.
I don't know. That's like completely ridiculous in my view. Income across the board is the key.
You're arguing about material, something that is immaterial.
No, we're not talking about the immaterial. What we're talking about is the fact that if you have a higher income, it means it's not just the amount of like, oh, you have more money that you can buy more toys. It's that you're probably living in a better neighborhood. You're probably the pregnancy was probably planned, so both your parents probably wanted the kid. It wasn't an accident.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is that it doesn't seem to have to do particularly the gender dynamics here, or the father and a mother-led household. That seems to be across the board immaterial or dwarfed by the income. And I need evidence. If you're going to make that claim, I need evidence, though.
I need not present the evidence that is so obvious that you can.
But I can't
see it.
I can't do anything with it. It's like, well, it's common sense, bro.
Well, you have to admit, you already admitted that single households are not good for children. And if 95% of single households, single mother households, are also not good for children, since you admitted to the first, and the composition is basically a semantic difference, not a real difference.
No, it's not.
And this goes back to the same issue. Women and men are not the same, meaning that we cannot remove the father and think that it's going to have the same effects that if we remove the mother. The thing is that we as a society, we haven't run the experiment of removing mothers.
Didn't you say if we remove the mother, the child will die? Doesn't that make it seem like having a mother is more important than having a father?
Yes, for survival, obviously. If you don't
so
have
how
a
do we
mother,
know
the baby?
So how do we know the kids aren't better off with living in these single mother households than if they were living all with single father households?
You have all the evidence. You have all the data from the US Census. You have from the CDC. You have the.
But we don't have the data we don't have the data because, as you said, we don't have any data that really gives us a good view of how children would, what the effects would be if all these kids grew up in single father households compared to single mother households. Because it is such a minority, we can't make a claim like that.
We do not have the evidence right here, right now, in the chat, because I didn't brought the specific studies, but there are studies about this that you can.
Are they like? But I'm talking. Are they like substantial? Or are they like? Are we talking like?
Yeah. You can large sample sizes. You can do this with correlational studies. There's a whole depth of research about the difference between raising styles, because this is not a new problem. This is something that has been studied. We have studied how to raise children for about 100 years, and we know that the composition, it's important. It's not the income. It's not the income. That's one of the things that I want to really clarify to you. we're not talking about income. We're not talking about economics here. We're
it's
talking
not just
about.
a matter. It's not just a matter of. Here's a better question. Do you think if we took all the children who live in single mother households and we, the government, decided to subsidize them like ridiculously, and we just gave all of those women a guaranteed $100,000 a year salary, do you think these children would do better or worse?
I mean, compared to what they are doing now?
Correct.
Well, there are two avenues to take your hypothetical. The thing that you're hoping me to tell you is that they would do better because they have more money. The thing that I would tell you is that I'm going to tell you is that first, assigning $100,000 to each single mother household will basically exponentially rise the debt to a level that I don't think economists can think of. So that's not a non sequitur for starters.
Yeah, that's why it's a hypothetical.
Even if the value of the money wasn't lost, the underlying principle would still be the same, meaning that the money wouldn't make a difference to the people, to the children, meaning that even if they are materially taken care of, that wouldn't make their immaterial necessities be suffice.
But these aren't. But this is what you're missing when you're talking about the material versus immaterial. It's not just material. If you have higher income, that means you're probably able to afford a better house, a nicer neighborhood, less crime in the area, probably better influences, probably better schools, probably better nutrition, etc., etc., etc. So that material gives you the opportunity to have access to more and more, what's what I'm looking for, more advantages in terms of other immaterial things. That's the issue. It's not just like, if I have money, they probably wouldn't be living in the same neighborhood. They probably have different schools, etc., etc., etc. That seems to be across the board.
Even if they did, that wouldn't mean anything.
Why?
Because going back to the original point that I made is that going back to the nature reality thing is that psychologically, socially, economically, and on all axioms of human existence, it's better, and it's frankly just the way that it was intended to be, to have a mother and a father. That the fact that some people can survive without one or the other, it speaks more about human resilience and adaptability, but it's not a model of society that we should encourage. And that's the thing. Even if you have more money, even if you're materially wealthy, you're still not psychologically stable. You're still not completely instructed in the morals and economic productive ways of society.
How?
And you're not full, meaning that you're not as prepared as you should to deal with adult life, even if you have money. And we're seeing the results of that. Generation millennials and zoomers are finding out that work is harder, that life is not fair, that the economic systems are not designed to help you, and that means that the economic component is not the answer.
So Raphael, just to be all due respect, it seems like we're going away from like statistics and like reality and objectivity, and we're going into like philosophical mumbo jumbo. So I can only really so here's an
philosophical
example.
mumbo jumbo is just to realize that it's just to bring back to the point that in the realm of principles, this argument doesn't stand, but in the realm of reality and facts, it still doesn't stand, because most households on the US, you said it yourself. You said people don't have money for an emergency. People are more depressed than ever. People are more anxious than ever.
Here's a fact that I just want to like put up against your philosophy in terms of the mother-father household.com. What do you say about, or how do you refute then the fact that many studies have shown that children who were adopted from same-sex couples have just about the same, if not better, outcomes on average than nuclear family with a mother and a father. How do you reconcile that?
Well, I would say, since I'm not a scientist, well, not that type of scientist, I would say that if you're merely looking at the economic, if some couple, same-sex couple, is able to provide a similar stance of living to an adopted children who probably come from disadvantaged background, meaning that they're adopted for a reason, they didn't have a mother and a father. So they probably would do better, but I will.
No, we're talking about
that
on average. We're talking about like those kids compared to kids who were grown up in like with a mother and a father, with their mother and father.
Yes, I would say I haven't read the study, so I cannot
Shouldn't
accept
these-
that
shouldn't
statistic.
these kids-
And even on principle, I would say that it's not proper to try to
Yeah, but we're talking about
say that.
statistics, right? We're not talking about you can have whatever principle you want, but I'm talking about statistics.
But even in the statistics, you can say that they could be easily manipulated for political and propaganda reasons.
But so this is sort of the issue where it's like when you present a study, when you present a study that, well, no, it is reality.
You could perform that study. You can perform the study in upper middle class California, and that could check down, meaning that it could be the.
Wait, hang on. Why does
of that
why
moment?
does?
But
I thought we were talking about I thought we were talking about income didn't matter. Why are you mentioning middle class? If this is if the case, if your argument is correct, shouldn't children who are adopted into single same-sex parent households, shouldn't those children be doing just as worse as children who grow up in single parent households?
the problem is that we haven't been doing that for a long time. So there are no major psychological studies that look at the adoption rate of single or same couples for that long time, because that legislation is, I don't think it is even that 20 years old, so it's not even a generation has passed.
But even
since that's been legal, so that would be a highly biased study performed on really shaky ground. That
why would it be?
Wouldn't be.
Why would it be biased?
Because obviously the practice of same-sex marriage is not something that it has happened for a long time. It's relatively recent.
But
at the same time, adoption from those same-sex couples is not legal. It hasn't been legal for a long time, so we cannot contrast that with the general population, the general traditional, let's just say, arrangement of mother father married. So I would say that that study would be basically methodologically a nightmare, because it's not correlatable. The statistical variance is just too high. There are not enough population cases. There's a whole bunch of issues with your hypothetical that it would have to be sorted out, and most of them are really extensive. So
hang on.
What you're saying?
Just a 1 second. Even if that was true, even if you want to throw out the studies that I presented, if you just want to throw those out and say that they're not represented because they're too small sample size, it's not too common, doesn't that also apply to your studies about the effects of single father households on children?
No.
Why? They're an insane minority in terms of single parent households for children.
No, because even if they're, like I said, even if they're a minority within the standard traditional arrangement, they still exist or have existed for at least, well, you can argue how long single father households have existed, but they are more common than same-sex couple adopted children households. I think you can agree that one arrangement is more common. Well, at least by a factor of 10, just by a statistic, by mere statistic, just by a factor of 10 at least. Meaning, if from 100% of the couples arrangement, let's just say. Probably if you can say that at least 60% are traditional father-mother, let's just say another 20% might be divorce, father present, mother, another 10% might be single mother only, and then you got that maybe 2% of uh, father-led households, and you got another 7.5% of untraditional, meaning raised by an aunt or an uncle or grandparent or foster home or
Yeah,
gay couples or
but those
gay
aren't
couples
single.
would make gay couples would make like 0.01% of household composition of the U.S. So that's not
But even
something that's.
but regardless, wouldn't those kids, because they're not growing up with a father and a mother, like as you say, shouldn't those kids be doing just as bad, if not worse, than from a what is the differing factor from a child who is adopted into a same-sex marriage and a child who's growing up in a single parent household? What's the difference there?
The difference is that they're both operating outside of the effective, most proven effective strategy for psychological and development well-being.
So why
Meaning
did the
that
adopted? So why are the adopted
well,
kids doing?
I said I don't grant the fact that adopted kids are doing way better. I
Okay.
not granted
No,
that statistic.
they're doing just as across the board, just as good, if not better.
And what if I said that father-led households are capable of producing children that are doing just as good as dual heterosexual married couples? I could argue the same.
You could say
but
that,
but you're gonna
be
the problem is
you're gonna be negating what you said earlier, because you said that was not correct. Do you actually? Sorry, real quick. Do you think children who
both
grow
are not
up?
Correct. I think you and I are running around circles arguing about studies that we don't have at hand. You're arguing on principle, and I am arguing on principle.
No, I'm not
That's
arguing.
What you haven't realized.
I'm looking at statistics that show that children who were adopted by same-sex couples, the children tend to do just as good, if not better, than the general population. That seems to debunk the idea that a child who is born particularly without a father or a mother, the point I'm trying to illustrate is that having more people in your life looking after you, taking care of you, paying for your life, of course that's going to be better for the child across the board.
That's better.
Exactly.
The fact that you have more people to take care of a child, it's better.
Yeah,
the fact that you have the right set of people to raise a child is also even better.
Yes, people who care for the child, who love the child, who want to see the child thrive in the world.
Yeah, obviously, if you have just one parent, that's going to be a burden for them. So
I agree,
they're not going to be able
because
to provide.
Because the parent isn't going to have the resources to do it all on their own. Having two parents, regardless of the sex or gender or whatever, is going to be better for the child across the board.
But even better yet, having a setup where both parents are from different genders, or it's likely to give even better outcomes for the children.
What are you basing that off of? What statistics?
The statistics that I'm showing that I did copy the link about the consequences of fatherlessness.
But we're comparing. Hang on, real quick.
That goes back to the original point. Men and women are not the same.
But you're comparing. We're not comparing a fatherlessness household or a single parent household. We're comparing a child raised in a household with a father and a mother, and a child raised in a household with the same sex parents. What evidence do you have the child is doing better in the former than the latter?
Well, I will argue, based on the statistical data that you can find, that children that are raised with a mother and a father do better in general. This is the most optimal solution. Meaning that there is no other better strategy for raising children than with a mother and a father. All other strategies for raising children are secondary to the primary, meaning that you can can see that from, you can research it, and I think that you can find it in both Jordan Peterson, and you can find it in Louise Perry. You can find it in Mary Harrington. I think you can find it in what was his name? It's not David Buss. David Buss is another psychologist.
You can find Raphael, it in Raphael, real quick, just to establish, all of those studies are talking about 2-parent households compared to 1 single-parent households, correct?
Yes, but what is a 2-parent? What again? We're going to semantics.
No, we're not, because I'm trying to compare.
What is a 2-parent household?
Two men, mother and father. 2 men or 2 women.
That's not true. That's too recent. That's not.
I don't.
That's not been a thing yet.
Actually, here's a question. Here's a question. 20 years from now, 30 years from now, if we did another study and it turned out that all the kids who were adopted to same-sex parents did just as good or better than households where there's a mother and a father, would you change your mind on this issue?
What do you mean?
So let's say an X amount of years went by, and it was finally long enough where you felt that the sample size for children who were adopted into same-sex couple households, that these kids, that it was enough for you to make a general ruling. And the results show that these kids did just as good, if not better, than children who were raised in, on average, a father and a mother household. Would you change your view on that? Would you then say, okay, yeah, it seems like it's not necessarily a mother and a father, it's more just having a 2-parent household?
Well, again, you're begging the question. You're putting me in a situation where I have no option but to agree with you, but I don't agree with the premise.
You can disagree. You can disagree on principle.
I disagree both on principle and on statistic, because I don't think that the statistical data that you can provide would be either valid enough or sufficient enough to make a general ruling about society. I mean, can you find an example of a child who's raped by a same-sex couple that did good? You can find that example.
On average, it seems to be. On average, they seem to do just as good, if not better, according to statistics.
The problem is that those children, first, you're not taking into account the whole well-being of the child. You're just looking at, obviously, the economic and academic results. Obviously, we haven't touched on all other aspects of child rearing. But even if you only grant that, it still wouldn't be enough to make a ruling on society. It wouldn't. It never would be. It cannot be by mere statistic. There's not enough gay people. There's not enough adoption. There's not enough same-sex couples who adopt to ever get to that ruling. So
let's say
I don't agree that's statistically possible or principle possible.
Okay, so let's say all of that is true then. So then how can you make a ruling then that the ideal setup is a father and a mother, when whether or not children raised in same-sex household end up better or worse or whatever isn't proven? Because you can't prove that, right?
Yes, but based on both principle and statistic.
Well, no, there are no statistics comparing the two, so how can you say one's better than the other? You just went on a rant that's saying, like, hey, there's no way we can tell whether or not children on average raised in same-sex parent households are going to do better or worse than father and mother. If you just said, you know what, we don't know. What I do know is that children raised in 2-parent households compared to one. I think even actually, sorry, just to correct you. I actually think that Jordan Peterson has said, I think it was, I forget, he was on a Swedish broadcast. He was asked about this directly. And he said,
yes, he said
I can't say for sure. And he said, and yes, and he knows that 2 parents, and he said that he knows that 2 parents are better than 1. He said nothing about the male-female gender dynamics of that marriage.
Yeah, he said 2 parents households are better than non-parents household.
which I think
But
we can all agree.
Again, yes, we can all agree on that. The problem is we're trying to argue the exception, and I don't argue the exception, or argue the most common or the underlying most likely scenario.
No, but
you're arguing the exception. I'm
not
I'm
arguing
saying that. I'm saying just like
Raphael,
I said previously.
To be clear, I'm not arguing the exception. I'm saying that
yes,
we don't have enough.
If we
don't have enough evidence to make a claim either way, that's what I'm saying.
We do. Actually, we do. That's the main issue. Well, the problem is.
Can you show me the evidence that children who are in father and mother households do better than children who are raised in same-sex households? Can you show me that data?
Well, if you want the specific set of data, I cannot find it right now
exactly.
because
That's
I didn't prefer no. But even if you don't want to grant the point, you cannot argue against the obvious, really pulsating everything in the statistical record that having a mother and a father is better. I mean, wait, hang on,
real quick. Having a father and mother is better than what?
It's better than basically all others.
Like what? What are the other options?
Orphan, being adopted, being adopted by a single father, being raised by your grandparents. It's better than all of the others. It's better than all the others raising styles that people have developed throughout all of human history.
Being raised in a two-parent household. It's better than
because
everything
that's.
Else. I agree.
Yes, a two people household, mother and father household.
What is the evidence of that though? There's no evidence supporting that. That's the issue.
Dude, you cannot tell me that you can look at the historical record for economic production, happiness, productivity, even the amount of college degrees that people are obtaining. You cannot tell me that you can see all of those and correlate that to the fact that most people have mothers and fathers.
But the correlation is those children being raised in a two-parent household. Whether or not it's mother or father, mother, we don't have the data to support either way.
Before 2010, all two-parent households were mother and father households. Before 2010 or something.
That even hurts your point more because then we have nothing to compare it to.
We have something to compare it to.
No, we don't. We don't have any.
Yeah,
you would have to show me. We
do. Sorry, we do. We have evidence dating back as far as the 19th century for all other raising styles, meaning we had mother and father married, we have single mother, we have single father, we have grandpa, we have raised by an aunt, and you can see it from the psychological record. Again, you can read it from Piaget. That's one of the major psychologists that study child development, and he is the primary psychologist who established how children develop psychologically, and he denoted why having a father and a mother was important. He codified that, even though that has been known for centuries. I mean,
but
you cannot argue against it.
But we don't have any evidence supporting that, comparing it to mother, father, right? You even admitted that we don't have any evidence supporting that.
Because the evidence mother and mother, father are just really modern.
But that's the point.
But we do have evidence. But we do have evidence comparing to only mother, only father, raised by grandpa, raised by grandmother, adopted, raised by the church, raised by community.
Because having two parents is better than having one. No one disagrees on that. No one.
Yes.
No one disagrees.
Yes, but having two parents throughout all of human history always meant having a mother and a father. Just until recently, 2000.
Correlation is not causation. This is like square one. This is so basic. The same issue with when you come with the fatherlessness and single. The correlation, the issue there, the causation, is living in a single-parent household. The fact that they're mostly mothers may or may not have anything to do with the outcome of those children. You can theorize that all you want, but you have no data supporting it. That's the issue with the red pill manosphere, is that you guys will look at something. You guys will look at something. You'll look at a statistic, and instead of
you don't understand the relationship between statistics and how they are presented.
No, I don't think you do. That's the red pill issue.
No.
When I look at children grown,
in order to understand a statistic, you need to read how the statistic was gathered. That's something called methodology of research. And in order to know methodology of research, you have to be obviously trained as a scientist. To be trained as a scientist, you have to understand the rules of logic. To be able to understand the rules of logic, you do have to understand that even though you can say that correlation doesn't equal causation, you do have to accept that there is some cause associated with a cause for every statistic, even if they're not directly correlated.
Yes, the
cause you cannot say
the cause is children growing up in single-parent households, not the fact that they're the mothers raising them. In order to prove that the issue, in order to wait, hang on, real quick. Just let me just get my point out, and then you can respond to it. In order to prove that the issue is particularly fatherlessness, or children being raised by mothers, you would have to compare those children growing up in single-parent households to those same children if they were raised by their fathers. But we have no evidence or anything. We're not able to conduct that because we can't have it can't be, like you mentioned before, a Schrodinger's cat situation where the same kid is, we have two alternate realities where that kid is raised by his father and that kid is raised by his mother, and so we can see how it turns out. It's okay to say, hey, we for sure know that children who grow up in single-parent households do worse than children who grow up in double-parent households. I think we should all be able to agree that the evidence bears that out completely. But then, this is the red pill issue. You take the jump by saying, oh, it's not just the fact that it's a single-parent household, it's that it's a single-mother household. And then I ask, well, what evidence do you have of that? And you aren't able to present any.
This is not an academic debate, so I didn't have the study at hand. That's why you cannot present the study also that says that same-sex couples raise just as good children as mother-father couples.
But it doesn't matter because
that's not the point. The point, again, that I'm trying to make is that you are arguing the exception. You are arguing that has to be proven. I don't have to argue the fact that throughout most of human history, people have been raised by the mother and the father, and that was the most effective strategy. And the fact that we're in modernity, that the problem is people of the past couldn't perform all the things that we can do now, meaning that they didn't have statistical data, they didn't have the fact that you can gather massive surveys, and a lot of this scientificism that you want to argue morality from. That's not something that it used to happen, and that's the problem. That's the problem of the people who don't understand. Red pill doesn't mean, and it doesn't mean that you are arguing a thing that's not real. The thing about the red pill is you have to learn what reality is, and then you have to work on it. You do not work in a hypothetical. You do not work from a preferred standpoint. You work from history. You work from basis. You work from human psychology. And you go from logic to philosophy to the principle of the thing. If the principle of the thing is not true, then everything that comes after that, by definition, by the logic of consequence, cannot be true. And that's the main issue. We're arguing, spitting facts about studies that neither of us have. So I wasn't arguing.
Hang on, real quick. If neither of us have studies supporting our points, then the only reasonable option is to defer to say we can't say for sure.
No.
Yes, that's
not
what
true.
that means. If we don't have evidence, If you make an affirmative claim, you have to present evidence supporting that claim. If you can't just say, well, I don't have any evidence, but come on. Like, that's not how that works.
No, that I'm not saying, but come on. I'm saying I can show you, I can argue with you just from rationality, just without and looking at any statistics. I can argue to you that mother and father are essential for raising children without any evidence, without any statistical data. I can argue that mother and father are the optimal raising strategy for children.
Based on what?
Based on the psychology of it.
Right.
Based on psychology, if raising children is a psychological work, then I probably should quote Carl Jung, Jordan Peterson, Piaget, Ferdinand Saussure. Probably sociologists and psychologists are the most experts that I have dealt on this issue. Who are you going to quote on raising children?
Did all of those people compare the results of the father and mother households to same-sex couple households?
No, okay, because those people were frankly much better educated than most people today are, and they weren't arguing on the scientificism technicality of a statistic to derive their own conclusions. They were doing better science, basically. They were doing experiments, they were writing about it, they were confronting the ability of children to be raised by actually performing that, and not by looking at a hypothetical from a correlation study from a desktop and an Excel spreadsheet. So
here's a quick. I have to go soon, but here's the final question. Do you think if I were to talk to like Carl Jung or Jordan Peterson or any of the people you mentioned, and I said, "Hey, would you be open to the possibility that children would do just as good, if not better, with two adopted same-sex parents?" Do you think that they would be open to that and say, "Hey, we should actually like try and do studies on that and look at the data and see what the outcome is so we can compare them?" Or do you think they would just scoff at it and say that's bullshit? I'm not even going to grant that at all. What do you think these gentlemen would say?
I say that most of them, as scientists, out of curiosity, they would like to find out the truth, and they would like to probably research on that. So I will say that if you were to ask maybe Carl Jung, he'd probably say yes. Jordan Peterson, he wouldn't do that because he doesn't like the idea that we can experiment with people. That's what we're doing basically by running the society that we have right now. And it depends on the scientists.
How are we experimenting with people? We're just looking at statistics of how kids who get adopted by gay couples turn out, right? We're not really experimenting. We're just like recording data.
Yes, but we have to let it happen to begin with. So somebody has to run the experiment, just like with the other major issue.
It's not really experimental. It's not an experiment. We're just recording data.
Yeah, that's the problem. That you have to run a societal experiment in order to let this play out. You cannot do a clinical study like a biologist could do with a sample on a petri dish. You have to let it play out in society. And the problem with societal studies is that they are not, they're too broad. They're not able to be performed, and you obviously have the moral consideration of using human beings as experiments. If you ask, you can do that. John Money did that, but I don't think that what John Money did was moral. So I don't think that we can play with people just to find out which is the most effective.
But we're not.
Where we rationality thinks it's most effective.
Well, you keep saying experiment. We're not playing with anyone. We're just seeing how things turn out. We're just comparing data. No one's being experimented on.
Well, not in the classical sense. Nobody's picking their brains, but you do realize that people have performed studies separating twins and putting them
Yeah,
in
we're
situations.
not talking, but we're not talking about any of that. We're just saying, hey, how do kids who are adopted
that's the
by
only way.
same-sex couples compare to children who are raised with a mother and a father?
I think that's the only way that you could perform the household, and then you gave one twin to the father-father household, for example. That would be the only way to perform a really correlational study, eliminating the genetic variant of the child, meaning that they're twins, so they're genetically the same.
But if that's the only way we can,
that's research of science.
But if that's the only way we can conduct that study, then doesn't that completely invalidate your study on the consequences of fatherlessness?
No.
Why?
No, because you're asking if those scientists were to perform that study, they would need to do that to eliminate the difference in biology, meaning that children with different genetics have different predispositions. So one kid might be autistic and the other might not be, and that might not be related to the parenting style. But there is this thing that you can find in statistics that's the larger sample size tends to, but it's not equal to, less a bias in the result, meaning that if you grant enough responses, you are going to end up with a more accurate solution or more accurate results than if you have a small sample size. It's just a sample size thing. And if you are able to perform a study about fatherlessness, that's much more broad. Like I said, it's much more common to find a father-led household that you are able to find a dual gay couple led household. So that's one of the things.
Yeah, because it's not necessarily about like we don't have to take a bunch of kids and like rip their parents away. We can just look at the outcomes of a larger sample size, see how the kids turn up, and make conclusions based off that. We don't have to experiment on them. We just have to observe how the kids turn out and then go with that info, right?
Yeah, but that
info. So I don't see why that's any. I don't see why it's any different than looking at children who turn out in same-sex households and saying, "Hey, seems like all these kids are doing pretty fine, if not better than the other families." Why? So wouldn't that at least pique your interest to say, or at least make you question, "Hey, maybe this idea of the father-mother isn't as ironclad as we thought, and maybe it's more about two-parent households, more about income, more about other factors, not particularly the dynamic between father and mother?"
There are two different questions there. Would it pique my interest? Yes. Obviously, if I want to find out which is the most optimal solution for raising children, obviously you have to perform a study and you have to research all about it, so it's curious. So for me, it would be interesting to do that. The problem is you're presupposing an outcome that is not bear out, meaning that you think on principle that having two parents is that those parents' gender doesn't matter to the equation.
Hang on, real quick.
I'm arguing that gender does matter.
Hang on, real quick. I'm not making a call either way. I don't know if gender matters. That's the issue we're having. You're making an argument that gender does matter based on no evidence. I'm saying there is no evidence. I don't know if gender matters. So making claims that gender does matter, I think is irresponsible because we have no data backing it up.
I reject the idea that you think that evidence is only statistical and it's only something that you can derive from whatever pickup studies you can find from whatever university you can find. I'm
not saying that like I'm not pointing to any studies. I'm saying I don't
That's
have
a problem.
Any studies.
Your argument from data that you don't have. I'm arguing data. I'm arguing principle. And
I'm saying because we don't have the data, we can't make. I don't have the data as to what is inside of a black hole, so I'm not going to make a presupposition. I'm going to say I don't know what's in a black hole. If you said we don't have the data as to what's in a black hole, but I'm going to suppose what is in there anyway, that's the issue.
That's all. You just argue against all of modern physics. All of modern physics is theoretical. It is derived from reason. We have never gotten even close to a black hole. We can only observe a black hole by looking at a telescope and the X-rays that it produces throughout space, meaning we
So
are
if
not
I
able to directly experiment a phenomenon to be able to research upon it or to
so if I
talk about it.
asked those physicists what's inside of a black hole, what would they say?
Well, if you ask Stephen Hawking, I don't know, he's dead,
I would
but
ask any physicist. I say, tell me exactly what is in a black hole. What would they say?
they would say, obviously I'm not a physicist, but physicists would say, based on the evidence that they do have, that the black hole has to have some sort of material composition. It has to be composed by some sort of atom or a structure, given that everything else in the universe is composed by atoms. And they have to be composed by something. So we don't know the exact nature of the material that is composed of the black hole is composed of.
So what would they
we
say?
Huh?
So what would
they
what would
would
the answer be? What would the answer be? It's a very simple
they,
answer.
They will have to theorize about what's in it. Dark matter.
They can only
hydrogen,
theorize.
hypercompressed hydrogen. They will have to say.
I'm not asking for a theory. I'm asking what is in the black hole. What would they say?
They would say that based on the evidence that they do have, each physicist is going to have their own interpretation of what a black hole might contain.
But I'm asking about what is in a black hole. If I said, tell me exactly what is in a black hole, what would that physicist say?
Like I said, it depends on what the theory that the physicist subscribes to.
I'm not asking about theories. I'm asking about ironclad proof. What is in that black hole?
You cannot ask a physicist to give you ironclad proof.
Why?
Well, you can ask. First of all, it's not a physicist; it's an astrophysicist, because they will tell you this themselves. All astrophysics are theories, are numbers and observations from telescopes. That's the whole realm of astrophysics. That is derived from mathematics, and mathematics are derived from reason, meaning that they can only arrive to a reasonable conclusion of what they can observe from their mathematical models. They will never make a claim about the chemical composition of a black hole that they cannot research upon. They will just theorize about it.
They'll never make a claim.
That's the problem. That's true. Science can make claims, but
I am not making any claims. You're the one making claims.
Yeah,
that's the issue.
But the problem is that you cannot exist in a world without claims. Meaning that even if you're not able, even if you're not able to find the most perfect and accurate solution to a problem, that doesn't mean that you don't have to produce a solution to a problem. Meaning that even if Galileo couldn't go to space, it wasn't meaningless. It wasn't meaningless that he theorized about the movements of the stars. That's the problem. Philosophy of science is not about finding the perfect solution or the perfect theorem. Is we're working with imperfect information, and we have to derive the best solutions that we have from imperfect methods, imperfect data, imperfect reality. So we have to basically do our best as people to find a solution, to provide an answer, even if that answer is not complete, even if the answer is not perfect. That doesn't mean that the answer is not valid. That's what you have to understand. I knew you have to go, but my main issue is that I do not agree with the scientificism that a study has to prove it in order for me to argue. I argue on principle, not in studies.
Is it possible that children, if on average, if they were raised by same-sex parent couples, is it possible that those children would turn out just as, if not better, on average, than children who are raised in father-mother households?
Again, I'm not a psychologist. I'm not that type of social scientist. So that's a loaded question. That's
no, I'm just saying if it's a possibility.
I mean, you can say that that's a possibility. That's one of the things that you can argue in a study.
Yeah.
You can
And that's okay. That's okay. It's okay to say, yeah, I'm not sure. We just have to go with the data we have, the best data we have right now, and we just have to move forward the best we can. That's absolutely fine. But when we turn around and try to make ironclad claims like, no, this is optimal, as opposed to this, when we have no evidence for it, that's the issue that we're running into.
That the problem is that you cannot do that if you're ever going to construct any sort of knowledge ever, because you're never going to be able to have the perfect data, the perfect moment, the perfect study, the perfect thing. And that's scientificism. That's not real science. Real science is about theorizing. Real science is about principles. Real science is about researching the background and the citations and the authors about it. It's not just about, hey, this latest piece of statistical data says that the most optimal thing for me is to do X. That's not how human beings works. That's not how universities work. That's not how studies work. So not having a position is not the correct answer. Having a position.
I'm not having a position. My position, based on all the data that I have.
Your position is that you don't know. Your position is you don't know.
It's not. It's not. It's that two parents are better than one. And that is the only thing. That is the only thing I can say for sure.
That's the only thing that you have conceded. Yet, I argue that's a semantical difference. That's a semantical distinction that is basically rendered meaningless. It's meaningless when you understand what two-parent household actually means. It means mother and father, basically.
No, it just means two-parent households. It could be mother, father.
No, that's a new thing. All the studies that were performed before, let's say, just 2010, always look at two-parents households, and they assume that the composition was mother and father, because that's the most likely thing that you have to assume before 2010, that most two-parent compositions were mother and father. So I'm arguing that you're making a distinction without a difference based on principle.
So maybe in 100 years we'll have data supporting the idea that children raised in same-sex couples do just as good, if not better, than the mother-father. Maybe.
Yeah, that's something that you're arguing on principle, not on data.
No, I'm not arguing. I'm not arguing.
You're hoping that the fact that you're posing the question in a hopeful tone, it means that you want it to be true, and that's why you have been arguing about that throughout all the conversation.
I would want it. I would want it to be true that children born in the single. No, hang on. Listen. I would want it to be true that children who are born in single-parent households do just as good as in two-parent households. But I cannot say that because I have proof, statistical data, showing that is not the case.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. You might want to think something.
Do you not want to argue something? Do you not want those kids to do just as good? Do you want them to do worse?
Going back to the original stance, red pill and blue pill. Red pill is accepting the harsh truths of the world. Blue pill is thinking that the world is going to be like you want it to be. The world is not how I want it to be. The world is how it is. And it happens to be the fact that children raised by mother and father do better than children raised by only their mother or only their father. And we are not able to determine if having two gay parents is better for the child, because that style of parenting is too recent to be able to even enter into a, let's just say, an argumentative data about it. So I'm not arguing.
Yeah, wait, hang on. Okay, I gotta go. We're done. You said it. We don't know. That's okay. That's awesome.
We do know that children do better with mother and father. You're just trying to conflate example.
Compared to single-parent households, but not compared to same-sex couples.
Yeah, but you're making a distinction without a difference because of a modern bias about that fact that we now have two father-father households or whatever, but that doesn't invalidate the fact that throughout most of human history, children were always raised by a mother and a father.
Two-parent household, yes.
Mother-father household.
Yeah, two-parent
Male-female household. Male-female household.
A two-parent household.
Two-parent household composed by a man and a woman.
Okay. All right, man, I gotta go. Thank you so much.
Yeah, well, I don't know if you need to go. We have like a couple of minutes to chit chat about things that
No, I
not
have
about the
to.
argument.
I have another podcast I gotta get to, but thank you very much.
Well,
We
I
can
really
do
appreciate that.
we can do another talk sometime.
I would like to do that. Honestly, it was really fun. But again, I would like to argue more on principle than on statistical data, since obviously I didn't bring any statistical data to a chit chat or to a principle discussion or argument discussion.
Well, next time, please bring statistics, because I really like to talk about statistics.
You didn't bring any statistics, so.
Wait, what?
So you didn't provide any statistics, so it did.
Did I make any Did I make any statistical claims?
Yeah.
Like what?
You claim that you had a study that said that same-sex couples produce children that did better than the.
Yeah, but I conceded that even if those, even if those were bullshit, even if they were all biased and bullshit, that it still doesn't prove your position, right?
That you provided that study. Well, you presented a study that you didn't provide it, and I wasn't arguing on a study. I was arguing on principle and on the evidence.
Yeah, but you were the one who made the affirmative claim, right?
Yes, but my affirmative claim is based on logic, not on data. I never said that I have a study from XX that said XX.
So you don't have a study that says XX, but you're arguing XX.
I'm arguing XX based on principle, not in studies.
Okay, that's fine.
I think I made that very clear that it's better to argue on principle than on studies, because, like I said before, studies are not perfect, unreliable, and there is a recency bias that we cannot argue over, because that's a problem of method of study.
Next time we talk, when you present the study about children in single father households, I'll make sure to just completely disregard that.
I didn't present a study. I made a claim, a logical claim. The idea was to refute the logical claim within the logical construct itself, not provide an outside study that I didn't bring forward in the first place. I was always asking, even if you will hear all this conversation again, and you will notice that I'm always talking in terms of principle, not talking in terms of data or study or scientificism or methodology of research.
Then why did you bring up that study about the single fatherhood at all then?
Because you were asking about it, the single father study, and obviously if you ask, I can provide something to you, but it's not going to be something.
But we shouldn't even consider that. We should just look at the fatherlessness, right?
The consequences of fatherlessness.
Of children raised in single family households.
Single
parent households, sorry.
Single parent households are, yes, you can consider that, but again, all the hour was stuck in a really categorical mistake, or maybe a categorical difference. You're arguing that the phrase single parent is different than the phrase
single
mother.
Not single parent, single mother. Yes. Well, no, they're two very distinct categories.
No, I think they're basically categories that are so similar that there are synonyms.
Wait, so if I say single parent households are bad, then then I can't say mother or father because it encapsulates both, right?
No, if you say single parent households are bad, you include the fact that single mother households are bad and then single father households are bad, because that's the only two compositions possible.
Yeah, I agree. Single parent households are bad. They're not as good as single two parent households. That's all I know.
Yeah, but again, you are making a categorical distinction that it's basically meaningless, because you can clearly tell that most single parents households are mother-led households. So if you said that single parent households are bad, that means most mother-led households are bad.
But that also means that single father households are bad.
Yes,
Yeah.
obviously that would mean that they're efficient in the sense.
So why would I say single mother and single father households are bad?
Again,
why wouldn't I just say single parent households are bad?
Because we were arguing before about that, the difference between men and women.
We were arguing whether which one was worse.
Yes, and I would argue that on principle, since we have run the experiment of not having fathers in the households, and we can see the evidence from the societal disintegration that the US is living right now, that is so clear that I don't think that you need to argue for it. You can see it in the homelessness and the drug addiction and the depression and the anxiety, that not having fathers is not a good thing. So that's my general principle argument.
And all of that could just be true if 90% of these single parent kids had no mothers.
But that's a hypothetical. That's not the case. Yeah. That's not reality. That's your hypothetical. That's trying to equalize
but again, it's possible.
Motherlessness from possible, but not the reality. Yeah. We're discussing reality, not the hypothetical. Yeah. So if in a hypothetical reality, motherlessness was as bad as fatherlessness, I would argue that that wouldn't be good, and that you should raise children in mother and father households, like I originally did. But you were arguing in a hypothetical that does not adhere to reality. The reality is most children are raised without their father. Most children suffer from being raised without a father.
In single parent households.
And yes, most single parent households are women-led households.
Single parent households.
Yeah, single parent households are mostly women-led households.
But they're also single father households.
No, the majority of single parent
but
households
there are single parent households that are single father households, right?
Yes, they are.
Cool.
But they're not the majority of them.
But we're not talking about minority. Majority, we're talking about whether or not they're good or bad.
I was talking about majority and minority because I do think there is a distinct relationship between the percentage of and the outcomes of.
Do you have evidence for that?
I mean, what more evidence do you need?
A study demonstrating that children wind up better in single father households than single mother households.
Do you need that study to actually come to the obvious conclusion that children raised without their father are bad? So do you need the opposite?
I need a study saying that children raised in single father households wind up better compared to single mother households in order for me to make the claim that children raised in single father households wind up better than children raised in single mother. Yes, I do. I do need that. And maybe next time you come on, I have to go. Maybe next time you can provide it. But we'll see.
But you do not need, because you're comparing to the neutral, the two-parent household. You're not comparing to the exact opposite.
Exactly. So that's all I can say is two-parent households are better than one. Thank you very much for coming on. We'll talk again.
Okay. Thank you.
I gotta go, guys. Thank you very much for tuning in. We'll do more of these, but I gotta go right now. Thank you very much. Have a good day.